Okay, so did everybody get the releases?
No.
Did they get around? So if those releases are still, I made 60 copies, so I'm hoping that that's enough. So when they get to the back, if there's still some, if you just resend them forward again, and just so we can get those releases for tonight. And all it is just that allows us to use your image. Now these videos, they will be on YouTube, but they're not searchable, so they're not discoverable. And part of the reason why, and Jared was kind of making a joke about this, when I sent the email out today letting you guys know that we were going to do this, I tried to say it like this is, we only use these in the most extreme circumstances. So, because he was saying, so you can just watch the rest of the classes on video, huh? Because if people know they exist, then people are like, why can't we video? I'm like, well, because you miss a lot not being in the room, and you got to get to be friends with each other, and there's just a lot that doesn't happen if people do all the training, especially the pre-service training on their own. So, but they are on YouTube, but we have to send people the link in order for them to find it, and so it's not like people are just going to be watching you on YouTube sit in foster parent class. They'd have to be invited to class, which means they would have had initial consultation, and they'd have to have this link. And the reality is they probably would only ever watch 1 or 2 videos. It's pretty rare. Sometimes we've had situations where, like because of work travel or something, there's one class that one spouse can't get to, or we had a guy one time who had broke his something and he was bedridden, and it was only a couple last classes. So it's kind of those situations. It's pretty rare though that folks do these in lieu of actually being in class. It's emergency situations. So, but if you sign the release, that just allows us to use your image, and it doesn't, I think it's so funny too, it doesn't allow your heirs to sue us for payment of using your, anyway, if you just get those run. And then just give them to me by the end of the night. Now, there are a couple spots where you can kind of see where you're going to be out of the way of the camera, but I'm going to explain why that may not be very helpful for you. We're going to play a game tonight, and I have a timer, and I'm going to set this timer 4 different times for 4 different lengths of time. Sometimes it will be a long time, sometimes it'll be a really short time, but I'm not going to tell you. Okay, I'm just going to set it and not tell you how long. The first time it goes off, I want you to collect everything you brought with you, move to a seat at least 2 seats from where you're currently sitting. The second time it goes off, I want you to take one thing you brought with you, leave it behind, move to at least 2 seats from where you're currently sitting, but not in a seat in which you previously sat. Okay, I figured that one out pretty quick, because people had a tendency to go between 2 seats. I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. Okay, so a completely different seat. The third time it goes off, I want you this time to take one thing with you, move at least 2 seats away, don't sit in a seat which you previously sat tonight. And the fourth time it goes off, I want you to leave everything behind except for your clothes, move at least 2 seats away, don't sit in a seat which you previously sat tonight. Sound like fun? No. Okay, I'll remind you each time what we're going to do. The people who come in late are going to be really confused. You'll be confused too, but they'll be more confused than you. So, but I'll remind you what we're going to do each time. All right, so tonight's class, this class, and I don't know why, like when Mick, who's our supervisor, was asking, which classes do you want to be filmed for? I said, oh, I'll take 4. And I'm sitting in there thinking, why the hell did I say 4? Because this class freaks me out, this particular class. 2 reasons. One, when they changed the curriculum, I felt like they left some stuff out, so we've kind of re-added some stuff in. So I feel like I've been working on this class a lot. And then the second thing is I think this is sort of the kind of a really pivotal one, that if we don't get this one, we don't get it. And so for me, this is one, it creates a lot of anxiety for me. So one thing that's helped me though, when I was thinking about how to like figure out what this class means, was I had just watched, how many of you guys have seen Maleficent? So I just watched it like the night before, and this is required viewing. And I was sweeping out my garage in my old house, and you always do your deep thinking when you're doing that kind of work. And I was thinking about this class, and I thought, you know what? This class is the origin story class. This is the class where we talk about kind of some of the whys, why we see some of our kids do some of the things that they do. Now, how many of you guys have ever known somebody that drove you crazy? Okay, well, I'm not done yet. and I think we all could raise our hands. And then, and it's so funny too, both of them both raised their hands, like completely independent of each other. And then you found out something about them, about their past, and you think, oh, that's why they do that. Now, it doesn't make them drive you any less crazy, but you probably have a little bit more compassion, a little bit more patience for them, even if the behavior still makes you nuts. And that's kind of the story of tonight. The story of tonight is thinking about where our kids come from, what their history has been, and every kid has a history. Now here's the other thing. Every single one of us in this room, we have an origin story too. And sometimes our origin story and our kids' origin stories clash. And so we always have to be thinking not only what is my kid's story, but what is my story? And have I come to terms with my own story with compassion and grace and understanding so that I can now give that same gift to the kids? Because if we haven't got there with our own story, we're not going to get there with our kids' story. So this idea will come up quite a bit. Now, the specific piece of the origin story we're going to talk about tonight is that trauma-informed shift, which instead of asking, and for decades we've asked, oh my gosh, what is wrong with this kid? And these kids have gotten diagnoses, official diagnoses. These kids have gotten labels. These kids have been called things like damaged and broken. And I think sometimes even the word traumatized has become another word for that. And we haven't really understood that this kid has a context. And if I don't understand the context, I don't understand the kid. And so this is that shift. Instead of what's wrong with you, is what's happened to you. What is your story? And how does your story help make sense of what you're doing right now? Now, the specific piece we're going to really focus on, we're going to kind of take the idea of the story and then really narrow it down to a specific piece of the story, and that's the relational history, specifically the attachment history of the child. And remembering once again that all of us have this too. I keep forgetting to pass these books around. These are books I've referenced in the first, I think, class number 2. I'm going to send another book around after the break, so it's on my desk. Also a book by Daniel Siegel, who has written The Whole Brain Child, who is a man I have immense respect for. He's written another book called Parenting from the Inside Out, and it's all about our understanding, our attachment story, so that we're better able to support our child's attachment needs. So we're going to talk specifically about the attachment history tonight, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of outcomes of attachment history, which is emotional regulation and initiative. Now, this is where this class really makes me nervous. You go home or sit in class and pull your phone out and you put in attachment and foster care, attachment and adoption. You're going to come up with hundreds of thousands of sites, most of them written by crazy people. And you're going to have no idea what you're looking at. Because the way the internet works is that the sites that have been around the longest, they've gotten clicked on the most, they've gotten linked to the most, so that's the stuff that shows up first. And the people with the worst information about attachment were also early adopters of the internet. And so they have gobbled up the domain names like attachment.org, attachment.com, attach.org, attachmentexperts.org, all of these things. And those are going to be the first things you're going to find. And you're not going to know what you're looking at because you don't know. You guys, your expertise is in different things, stuff that I don't know anything about, like how to work my computer. So you're not going to know what you're looking at. So I want you to be critical consumers first. Does everybody know that everything on the internet isn't true? Do you guys know that? Okay, because it's not. I know, you're like, wait, I thought they couldn't put it on the internet if it weren't true. Remember that commercial it used to be on a couple years ago? So everything on the internet isn't true. And there's a lot of faulty information out there. So you need to be critical consumers. So the people with really concerning information, anything that makes you think kids are dangerous or can't attach, won't attach, if they talk about things like Jeffrey Dahmer had attachment disorder, and Saddam Hussein and Edgar Allan Poe had attachment disorder, and they try to scare you, anybody who tries to sell you something by trying to scare you is someone you want to stay away from. So these are the folks you want to stay away from. The problem is you're not going to know. You're not going to know. So what we're looking for is the research that really is empirically based, so it has a good empirical foundation, good research, is compassionate and respectful of children and of parents. That's the kind of information you want. This is the other problem, is the people with the worst information, they were really good at disseminating it, but the people with the best information were the people associated with universities. Who do researchers in universities write to? Other researchers. And through what medium do they write to each other in? Journals, yeah. Academic journals, professional journals. And unless you are willing to pay $400 or $500 a year for a subscription to these journals, or you have access to a university library, most of us don't have access to that information. And if we do, unless you have the time, either because you've been to graduate school and so you know how to read these dense things, then they really do teach you to write in such a way that is pretty obfuscating. It really hides the meaning. So unless you really know how to read these things, the information, even if you get a hold of an article, is sometimes hard to really fully understand for most of us. So I would say in the last decade, though, that's gotten better, and the people with the really good information have started making it more accessible. Not only just we can actually get to it, but we can actually understand it too. And so there's some good stuff now, but you have to be aware that there's a lot of bad stuff out there too. So if you go to your manuals, and we're going to now go back to section 2. And this is, I told you guys I'd move stuff around just for the sake of flow. This is on page 38. We're going to talk briefly through the theory of how attachment, the process of attachment is really how I should say it. So first thing I want to say is that we are all born, any mammal with an extended dependency period, which is almost all mammals, but the longer your dependency period, the more pronounced your attachment system is, because the attachment system is all about keeping mama or caregiver close to me. Why would we be hardwired to keep an older, what's called a conspecific, which is from the literature, an older person, creature of our species close to us? Why is that important? Security. How?
Because you feel safe. Like they obviously know what they're doing. They're still alive. So clearly something they're doing is working.
Yeah.
And and you couple that with the attachment of just being born to that creature, and
that person's been there from the very beginning. I love that. No one's ever said that before. The fact that you're still alive is a pretty good clue that you're pretty competent. I never thought about that, but that's pretty good. So, and if you flip over the back of your manuals, and we have this back here where it talks about, this is all I need to know about supporting secure attachment in 25 words or less. Always be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. That's what that older conspecific is. Obviously they're bigger and stronger because they're and wiser because they're still alive. And then of course kindness is a necessity. So we are born hardwired, and this is critical. Because some people with the not great information about attachment will tell you that if a child doesn't learn to attach, in the first, and it depends on who you listen to, first year of life, 2 years of life, 3 years of life, whatever, they'll say that, and then they'll say that then they'll become a psychopath. They won't quite say it that severe, but it's pretty much what they're saying. And that drives me nuts, because we have this hardwired into us with millions of years of evolution. And while 3 years of neglect can kind of screw stuff up, it's not going to get rid of the need to attach. It might alter how it gets expressed, but the need is always going to be there, and that's a critical point. So I'm wondering if we've got a seat here and a seat there. Do you guys want to? Okay, all right. And then I guarantee you guys will get together at some point in the rest of this process tonight. I promise you're going to be okay. All right, so the first thing I want to say is when we talk about, so in this cycle where it talks about need, what we're talking about here are attachment needs. Another problem with attachment, some of the bad information about attachment, is they make everything an attachment issue. Everything is not an attachment issue. There are two core attachment issues. The first one, like Diana said, is safety. And that's the first one, is literal keep me safe. And not just keep me safe, but also, like we talked about, what the literature actually calls felt security. So it's not just keeping me safe, it's also helping me to feel safe. And there's actually literal research that talks about the attachment system is probably an entire body system that actually allows our entire, what's the word I want? I'm trying to think of the word. I can't think of the word, but it's the word, whether or not we feel safe or not, it actually allows that whole system to relax. And the second one is emotional regulation, which we'll talk about more in just a minute. Okay. So how do children say, you're too far away from me, I need you closer to me so I feel safe in the world? What do? They cry. Okay, what else do they do?
Depending on their age, they act out.
Okay, I'm so glad you said that. We'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, what else?
They move towards you, like crawl.
Yeah, so if they can move toward you, they'll actually come toward you. Okay, what else? Cling, yes. What else? What about this? I don't know how anyone in the world can not give into this. One of my coworkers' little boys, he used to go, hold you? hold you? How could you not? I mean, just, kids are good. And by that I mean they know how to get their attachment needs met. They know what works on us, and not it's going to work on me every time. Kids are going to do that to me because they know that. But they know what works for us. And every dyad, so every child and every caregiver, and kids have to navigate multiple attachment relationships. They have the two, if they're lucky enough to have two parents in the home, they have that. If they have a single parent, they might have a daycare provider, they might have a grandparent, they might have an older sibling. So we have to navigate multiple attachment relationships. And every kid may kind of have their own repertoire, but they're going to probably vary relationship to relationship because one thing's going to work more than another. And this isn't like a little 6-month-old kid thinking, okay, I'm with dad now. He doesn't respond really great when I cry, so I'm going to do this instead. It's not like it's a conscious thing. And this is where I think one of the failings of some of the, once again, the not great attachment stuff is that they spend a lot of time talking about cognitive stuff. This is body stuff. This is visceral stuff. This isn't just about what happens in our head. So every kid develops a repertoire with their caregiver to say, I need you closer. Now, if our attachment system's working pretty well, what do we do most of the time? Most, not all. When our kid does those things, what do we do? Yeah, by what do we do when we respond?
Well, I guess if a baby's crying, you pick them up.
Okay,
and you
yeah.
try to figure out what's causing that.
Yeah, so you meet the need to help them feel safe and help them feel secure, absolutely. So we meet their attachment needs, which I'm glad you said that, because for young children, it almost always requires physical contact. Like it's great if you walk in the room, but it almost always requires you pick up that baby. The younger the children are, the more they need physical contact. Now, as we get older, we still have people who give us a sense of safety and help us regulate our emotional experience, but we don't necessarily need to touch them to do that. There was a research study done a couple of years ago about female college freshmen, and they studied their cortisol levels, so stress hormone. They studied those in college freshmen who had a pretty good relationship with their mom, and all they needed to do was hear their mother's voice, and their cortisol levels went down. Now, for some of us, it makes them go up. But for, if you have a pretty good attachment relationship with your mom, when you hear your mom's voice, it actually reduces, once again, at a bodily level, it reduces that sense of stress. It helps to regulate you. So as we get older, we're better able to kind of hold them in mind, and we don't need that physical contact as much. We're also not as physically vulnerable. But when we're young, this almost always involves touch for young children. And then that allows the child to relax. And we've all seen that, that baby who's crying. So you pick up that baby who's crying, and you pick them up, and they're, and then they go like this. That kind of I love that, and once again, this shows this is a whole body thing. Their whole body relaxes when you pick them up and hold them. Okay, now how many times a day do you do this with a young child? Yeah, you lose count because you're doing it all the time. Yeah, you're just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And if you guys come to Circle of Security, which is a little bit more of an advanced attachment series I usually do it 2 to 3 times a year. It's a 2-part 4-hour series, so 8 hours, two 4-hour classes, so 8 hours total. We talk a little bit more about kind of the flip side of exploration and supporting kids in exploration. We're going to kind of focus more on this piece. Now, do you get around this cycle perfectly every single time with your kids? No. Why?
You maybe have multiple kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have more than one kid at a time. I had a woman in class years ago who, she and her husband, she was a first-time mom. Her husband's nieces came into care in California, and they got him. They were 4, 3, and 2. And she came to the Circle of Security, and we were talking about this, and she said, what do I do when they all need me at the same time? And the answer is triage. Which kid is bleeding? That's the kid that needs you the most, and then you go to the next one. So the reality is when you have multiple kids, you're always not meeting some needs in order to meet, at least in the moment, in order to meet other needs. So that's going to happen. Why else don't you get around this all the time? Erin?
I can't always figure out what it is my kids need.
Yeah. So sometimes they need something, you're trying to meet the need, and they're like, nyah, nyah. It's just never, it's never right. It's never good enough. And so you're trying to, and sometimes you never figure it out. Sometimes you never figure it out. Yeah, so we're not always able to read their signals clearly. Why else don't we always get around this perfectly? Time. You just don't have time. You've got to go to work. They've got to go to school. Why else? You have to go to the bathroom. You have the flu. You don't care. I don't care. Jared?
Sometimes their need is not always safe, right, or appropriate.
Okay.
They can need something, they feel something, but it's not actually appropriate. Does that make sense?
So the example I'm thinking of, and it may not be what you're thinking of, is in Circle Security, we talk about one of the needs, and it's kind of on the exploration side, is for a kid to explore their environment. We can't always support that because sometimes it's dangerous for them to do that. Yeah. So yeah, there are times when, and this once again goes back to this is actually from Circle Security, this saying, this slide. Whenever possible, follow your child's need. Whenever necessary, take charge. That sometimes the situation requires us to do something differently than the child's need in that moment. So there are times, yeah, that the need isn't something that can be met because something else more important, more pressing takes precedence over that. Now, here's the good news. The good news is that we only have to get around this enough of the time, and every kid is probably going to be a little bit different. Some kids are more sensitive than others, but we only have to get around this enough of the time for our kid to know that when the chips are really down, we're going to be there. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be good enough. And that's one of my absolute favorite sayings from D.W. Winnicott is kids don't need perfect parents, they need good enough parents. Someday I'm going to create a line of Mother's Day cards, because we just had Mother's Day yesterday, and it's going to say something like, thank you, Mom, for being good enough. Because that's all I really needed. Because so many of moms get those cards that say, you were perfect and wonderful and loved me all the time and did it. And most mothers read that and they think, no, I wasn't. No, I'm not. I just yelled at you yesterday. that it's okay. And we actually just had a class a couple weeks ago called Good Enough Parenting to let ourselves off the hook. Because when we are too stressed about always doing this perfectly, reading their needs every time, meeting their needs every time, meeting every single kid's every time, we're going to be crazy. And it's not going to actually be helpful for our kids. And so to let ourselves off the hook and know that if I do this enough of the time for any given kid, good enough is good enough. Now, if I'm good enough and I get around it most of the time and the child's attachment relationship, attachment relationship is assessed, then that child would probably be considered securely attached. And in the non-clinical sample, so these aren't kids in foster care, these are your guys' kids. These are just everyday kids in the United States of America, and these numbers do vary by culture because parenting practices vary by culture. 55 to 65% of kids are considered securely attached to at least one caregiver. So, and I'll tell you how they assess that in a second. Then there's another category called ambivalent. This is 10 to 15%. Another category called avoidant. This is 20 to 25%. Another category called disorganized, which we're not going to spend a lot of time on tonight, but we do spend a lot of time in Circle Security. General population, 10 to 15%. Foster care sample, 80%. This is where we see our kids live. Now, when you hear someone talk about attachment disorder, reactive attachment disorder, those are incredibly rare. What we actually see with the vast majority of our kids is disorganization, and I'll talk about that more in a second. Okay, so what they do is they bring in, the kid has to be young enough that separation from the caregiver is going to upset them, but they have to be old enough to be able to walk because they need to see what the kid does. So usually between the ages of about 16, I've seen them do as young as 14 months. The oldest I've ever seen them do it was 4, but most research protocols actually say 3 is kind of the upper limit. So it's a pretty narrow slice of kids that they can really do this with. As kids get older, they're able to hold us more in mind, and so our separation doesn't upset them as much. And what we're trying to do with the separation is to stress their attachment system to help them feel unsafe, basically, but not actually be unsafe. Whereas as the kid gets older, if we wanted to stress their attachment system and make them feel unsafe, we might have to do things that are ethically, sketchy, and no IRB is going to approve it. So little kids is usually what this is done. It's harder to assess older kids. Now, so what they'll do is they'll bring in, let's say an 18-month-old child. 18-month-old child, they bring them in with one of their caregivers, mom or dad, and the caregiver sits down. Child, oh, I forgot to tell you this. It's a waiting room. There's a toy box full of toys. Child comes in, with parent. Parent sits down. What does the kid do? 18 months old. They're going to look at the toys. Go play with the toys. Okay. Now, a couple minutes later, a stranger walks in the room. What do most kids do? Yeah, they usually either move toward their parent or they look at their parent, they orient to their parent somehow. Why do they do that? Yeah, it's called social referencing, and they're using their caregiver, their parent, to let them know whether or not that person's safe. Parent's fine, kid continues to play, then mom gets up, dad gets up, walks out of the room, leaves the child alone with a stranger. Now what do kids do? Yeah, they're not happy. They're anything from crying to standing by the door, or just looking concerned. Most of them look at the stranger like this, which is always good news. Caregiver comes back in, stranger leaves, parent leaves the kid is now alone. This all takes place in about 10 minutes. By the second separation, most kids are crying. So now what they find, the most important thing is this after the second separation, because now kids are pretty upset. Caregiver comes back in the room. What do most kids do when their parent comes back in the room? Yeah, pick me up. Okay? Most caregivers pick them up. What happens after the caregiver picks them up? They're happy, and then what happens? They go back to playing. Yeah, they go back to the play. That's exactly what you expect to see in a secure kid. They're upset at their parent's absence, their attachment figure's absence, and they're regulated by their presence, and they go back to exploration. That's secure right there. Now, these kids look a lot like these kids with a couple of big exceptions. The first one is they don't fully engage in play. They're like, there's toys, I really am interested in the toys, but there's mom. Toys, mom. Toys, mom. And they can't quite fully leave mom to fully engage in play. They get as upset or more upset than these kids, but once again, the most telling thing is the second separation. Caregiver comes back in. These kids, like these kids, go to mom, go to dad, say, pick me up. Parent picks them up. They don't calm down. And that's why I put them on this side, because they're conceptualized as staying activated. So caregiver holds them, but unlike the secure kids, they don't calm down. They stay agitated. But they also give mixed signals, because they'll straight arm mom, they'll hit dad, they'll arch their back, and the parent says, oh, you want me to put you down, but what happens if the parent tries to put him down? No, 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 pick me up. So that's what they call them ambivalent, because they're getting both come here and go away messages at the same time. These kids, what they find is, because they've done as natural as a study as you can do by being observed, which by the cameras being here, we all know that none of us are natural when we're being observed. But as natural that they can do, they've gone into the homes and they've done some studies. And what these kids, there's two things that are really prominent in the parenting of these kids. One is a caregiver who doesn't want to let the kid go. So you know those parents who the child wants to go out and explore, but the parent's always pulling them back? That happens with these kids. And caregivers who are really inconsistent. So sometimes they're incredibly aware, and sometimes they're so clueless, it's incredibly frustrating, and the kid doesn't know which parent's showing up. Now, these kids fascinate me. They saw these kids, they started doing this, it's called The Strange Situation. They started doing it in the 1950s. And so they saw these kids from the very beginning. And these kids, they'd come in, they'd start playing, stranger comes in, they're like, hey, stranger, and they keep playing. Mom leaves, they keep playing, stranger leaves, mom comes back, they're playing the whole time. They never go, they're never upset when she leaves, they never go to her when she comes back. They play the entire time. And that's a hunk of kids, that's a quarter to a fourth of kids in the non-clinical sample. And they said, according to the theory, you can't have that many kids who aren't attached to their caregivers. And so in the 1960s, they got more sophisticated in their measurements, and they started looking at blood pressure, heart rate, and cortisol levels, which they can just test with a saliva swab. All measures of stress. What happened to those measures when mama left the room? They all went up. What happened when she came back in the room? They all went down. So physiologically, this kid is becoming dysregulated at his mother's absence and regulated in her presence. This kid is attached, but he doesn't show it. Now, I want to tell you something. These kids generally have caregivers who say things like, quit your crying, I don't want to hear it, knock it off, regularly, not just once in a while, but a lot. That's like the response they get. And they get it young. By 11 months of age, kids know, I have the kind of caregiver who doesn't like it when I cry, so I stop crying. And this is smart, Because if the goal of the system is to keep my caregiver close to me, to keep me safe, and if I cry and they move away from me, I better stop it. And so this is adaptive. This is not pathological. This is not disordered. This is smart. I have the kind of caregiver who gets upset when I cry, and so I'm going to stop crying. And so they shut it down. But they're still attached. It just doesn't show. So this kid in your home, he's going to be out in the front of your house riding his bike up and down the driveway or the street. He's going to fall. He's going to get all skinned up, all bloodied up. You're sitting on the porch. Maybe you've gone to him. He gets up, he goes in the house, cleans himself up. This is this kid. Now, because he acts like he doesn't need you, does that mean he doesn't need you? Absolutely not. And this is the mistake I think that happens, is that we start to think that because kids act independent, it means they are independent. And I'll talk about this more in a few minutes. No kid is independent at 6. No kid is independent at 16. In fact, we're not independent. We'll talk about that more. So these kids I worry about in foster care, because there's some other behavioral issues. And 6 months in, you're going to say, yeah, I know they told us in pre-service that disrupting on a kid is one of the hardest things we ever do to a kid. And so I know I really shouldn't, but he's not attached to us anyway. And so if I have him leave our home, it's not going to hurt him. And you're going to break that kid's heart, and you're never going to know it, because he's never going to show you. But I guarantee you, he'll attach to you. He just won't show it. I'll tell you real quick, too, how easy this can happen. So I was at one of my neighbor's house, my old neighbors. Great people, lovely people, good parents, love their kids, okay? But this is how normative this can be. And why we see so many kids in a non-clinical sample. So I was over there, it was summer, so it was about 8:30 at night, it was still light, and the 3-year-old boy comes in the house, just that devastated cry, oh, the world has ended. And his dad said to him, what's wrong? And he said, my friend so-and-so across the street had to go to bed, it can't play anymore, and this little boy was just devastated. And his dad said to him, you know what to do if you're gonna cry. And the rule in their family was, you don't cry in front of other people because no one wants to hear it. You go to your room, you cry by yourself. And these aren't terrible people. This is just how they raise their kids, and that is incredibly normative. And so one reason we see a lot of avoidance is our culture says, no one wants to hear you cry. Knock it off, buck it up, suck it up. That this is very cultural, and you see different numbers vary in cultures. Now these kids, they started seeing these kids also from the very beginning, but they didn't know what to do with them, because they did weird things, like they'd walk to the parent backwards, they'd walk to the parent and then fall down. They would walk to the parent but like dissociate before the parent picked them up. When the parents would leave, the kid would be playing and the kid would fall asleep, which is also a form of dissociation in a situation where they wouldn't normally go to sleep. They just had behaviors that were really bizarre. And so for the first probably 30 years that they did this, they just kind of shoved them into one of the other categories based upon the other global behaviors. But in the 1980s, there were 2 researchers at Berkeley, and they said, we need to start looking closer at these kids. And so they started looking at them, and what they did is they looked at the kids who had these behaviors, and then they started talking to the parents of these kids. And they found that 85 to 90% of the kids who looked like that had parents who had an unresolved trauma history. Not a trauma history, an unresolved trauma history. And the trauma generally took one of 2 forms. One was that the parent had been abused and neglected themselves as a child, and or they'd experienced a significant loss, either as a child or recently. I went to a conference a couple months ago, and they were talking about this specific to loss. And this one woman, she had all these videos she showed us, and they were all incredibly disturbing. And there was a couple of them, she said, do you want me to show that again? And we're like, no, because it was so disturbing. One was this woman who had a child die previous, and now had another child and was now parenting this child. And take everything with you, move at least 2 seats from where you're currently sitting. If you came in late, take everything with you, move at least 2 seats from where you're currently sitting. I know. That's why I told a couple people, leave them in the kitchen, because it's going to be easier. I didn't tell him why. I just told him it'd be easier to leave him in the kitchen because you wouldn't have to drag him around with you.
Like not hug people that aren't like large groups. and they deserve to be respected too.
Yes. And considering the fact that I'm one of those people, you think I'd be more respectable of that.
Yeah, whatever, just 2 seats away.
Right now, you're okay to stay together. We'll talk about that as we get going.
We sit here?
You can sit there.
As long as you sit on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 2.
Yeah.
I'm pretty liberal of what counts for 2, so I'm not too rigid about that.
Let me go put those in the
Oh, thank you. That would be
that message.
very helpful. Thanks.
You're a good husband. Especially since he made you go and get them. The least he can do is take them in there. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's why we learned to sit up front, so
Yeah.
we can ignore that there's more people behind us.
It's actually a really good idea. All right. So anyway, so this video, she was showing us this video of this mom, and she was feeding her baby, and her baby was probably about 8-9 months, so still in a high chair, and was feeding the baby. So the mother was feeding the baby, and then but the mother would dissociate while she was feeding the baby. So she'd feed the baby, and then she'd go. And then she'd start feeding the baby again, and she'd feed the baby a couple spoonfuls, and then she'd dissociate. Do you think that's scary to a baby? Yeah, incredibly frightening. So these parents were transmitting trauma to their children, completely unknowingly, unwittingly. They didn't want to do this, but because they hadn't resolved it for themselves yet, it kept intruding on their life, which meant it kept intruding on their child's life. And so this child was being raised in an incredibly frightening environment. Even if there was no abuse or neglect occurring for the child, there still was enough that the parent was still dealing with that it was transmitting to the kid. And so what they've really found is that 2 things they see this show up. One is when the parent is frightened of the child, or when the parent is frightening to the child, as in the cases of overt abuse and neglect. And so, which is once again why we see such a huge number of our kids in this category. So now think about this. So going back to what Diana said, if the person taking care of me is supposed to be competent to take care of me, what happens when they're not? What happens when they're terrified? What happens when they're terrifying to me? What do I do when the person who's supposed to keep me safe is the person who's a threat to me? How do I resolve that dilemma? It is in the research is what's called an unresolvable dilemma. And so we see a lot of these kids who have a lot of approach and avoid behaviors, like they'll walk toward the parent and then fall down, or they'll walk to the parent backwards, or they'll walk to the parent associate. So they need the parent. They still need the parent. They're attached to him still, and yet they're terrified of the parent. And so this is very difficult when these kids come into care. And we'll talk about this in a few minutes too, that one of the most important things that we need to be aware of is that we're not scaring the kids too. And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. Okay, so these are the broad categories that we see. And a lot of us have histories that are mixed. If we were lucky, we got 2 perfectly, beautifully secure parents that were securely attached to both of them. The reality is most of us hopefully had at least one secure relationship, but we might have had another one that was less secure. This researcher, this conference I went to, one thing she talked about is she said that as long as kids have one secure attachment, they're good. It doesn't have to be mom or dad. It can be an aunt, it can be an uncle, it can be a teacher, it can be a foster parent. As long as they get one secure attachment in there, that is protective and will help them to overcome the difficulties of those other relationships. But it's the kids that don't have any secure attachments in their life that really, really struggle. Okay, so trying to think what I'm going to do next. All of a sudden I'm just having a blank. So when I went to, actually I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So the first goal then, the attachment system, the primary goal of the attachment system is felt security. Is in my bones, in the marrow of my bones, do I feel safe? And that is what we talked about that very first night, is helping our kids to feel safe. And as they feel safe, and some of these alarms can start to reduce, then that's when we start to see an attachment emerge with a child. It may never be exactly the same as if they never had a compromised attachment history to begin with, or that trauma to begin with, but it is going to be protective for them in the moment and later on. So I went to another conference. We have a symposium every year, usually up in Midway or Park City. And several years ago, we had Dr. Bruce Perry come, and I recommended his book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, last time, or maybe class number 2. And Dr. Perry was a speaker, and he is a funny, funny guy. He's foul, but he's funny. And he is brilliant, and he loves our kids, and he loves the work that you guys are doing with our kids. But he was talking about this, and he said, you know, with kids with compromised attachment histories, he said that we have a tendency to do it wrong because we don't necessarily understand what's going on. And so he talked about the 4 Ps, and I always forget what one of them is. Oh, I know it. I think I remember. In fact, I'm going to do it first so I don't forget, okay? Because I'll forget it. Because I think it's really important and I always forget it. Why is it critical for us to be predictable? For any kid, but certainly for a kid who comes from a compromised attachment history. Why is our being predictable? Andre?
Let them know what to expect.
Yeah. Why is that so critical?
Because that way they feel more secure.
Yeah. Because if I don't know what's coming next, that's a very frightening way to live. Uncertainty is very frightening. And so the more certain you are, the more predictable you are, the safer these kids are going to feel. How many of you have ever had your kids say to you, oh my gosh, I knew you were going to do that. Oh my gosh, I knew you were going to say that. How many of you guys ever had your kid do that? Okay, you're doing it right. Okay? Because that's what you want. You want your kid to be able to predict what you're going to do. They know you so well that they know what you're going to do. They know what you're going to say. And it doesn't mean you're boring. It means you're safe, and that's good. So the second thing, this is probably my favorite one. This is the one I always start with, I think, because it's my favorite. So Dr. Perry, kind of a lot of a chauvinist, and this will pick up here a little bit. So he was saying, okay, so let me tell you something between foster moms and foster dads. He said so, and I want to be really careful not to essentialize, because I know that within any given sex or gender, there's a huge variance of individuals. So I'm certainly not saying this is all men or all women, and never men or never women. But he said, okay, just as broad statements, foster moms, we get a kid in our home who hasn't been loved, who hasn't been nurtured, who hasn't been, taken care of, who hasn't been listened to. What do we want to do? Yeah, what do we want to do? We want to do all that for them. We are the chuckarama of love. They come in and we just, the buffet of love. I'm here for you. I'm going to love you and take care of you. And if you have a kid their experience with attachment figures has been unpredictable, frightening, overwhelming, frustrating, when they come in the home and they see that, how do a lot of them react? You're freaking me out. Okay. And they push back. And for a lot of us, when we offer everything we are to somebody and they reject that, how do we feel? Rejected. We feel rejected. We feel hurt. We feel mad. And all of a sudden that kid has an attachment disorder because I'm wonderful and any kid should attach to me. And if they're not, it's their problem, not mine. So he said, watch out for that. He said, now think about foster dad. You're out on the driveway. You guys are working on the lawnmower. How much conversation's going on? Almost none. And if there is any conversation, what's it about? The lawnmower. So it's mediated. Are they talking about feelings and relationships? No. So he said that we have a tendency to go here with our kids. He said when in fact we should be going here with our kids. He said back off. Don't go away. I'll talk about that in a second. Do not ever go away. Do not ever believe they don't need you. Just don't overwhelm them. Back off. So go parallel instead of too close. The third one then is to be persistent. So two things here. First analogy. So how many of you have ever had an old dog and gotten a puppy? How well does that go? What does the puppy do?
Drives the old dog crazy.
Why?
He wants to play.
Play. What does the old dog do? Snaps at him, barks at him, gets up, walks away, and what does the puppy do? Yeah, and so Mary Dozer, who's a really famous attachment researcher, she said, be the puppy. Which sounds a little contradictory to this, but you're not going to go here, you're just going to go here. But you're going to come back and come back and come back and come back and come back with enthusiasm and joy and belief that the kid's going to engage with you every single time. You're going to keep coming back. She said, be that puppy. No matter how many times the kid snaps at you, growls at you, bites at you, walks away from you, never believe they don't need you. Always believe they need you and keep coming back. So be like, so one of our foster parents told me the story. They adopted a little boy when he was about 2 or 3, and he was 7. She was volunteering in his school, not his classroom, but in his school. And one day she was there, and she was in the hall just at the same time it so happened he was coming out of his classroom to go to the bathroom. And so he saw her in the hall. And he said to her, "You're always there." She says, "Yeah, and I'm going to be," so that they cannot get rid of you. You are always going to be there. And I think that goes a lot with this too. Now, once again, if you're freaking them out, then go here, but never go away. You're always going to keep coming back. And then the final P we all hate. What is the P we hate? Yeah. Why do we hate patience?
Because we suck at it.
Because we suck at it. Why do we suck at it?
Because we want it all, we want it now.
We want it now. So all this effort. So before you ever even get the kids, you guys have made an incredible effort. You've made that first phone call, which I know for a lot of you was a big effort, sometimes years in the coming. You had the initial consultation. You signed up for classes. You come to class. That paper, Alicia was talking about the paperwork. You do the paperwork. You have you lock everything up, and you have. I mean, you guys have already put an incredible amount of effort into this. And this kid comes in your home and acts like they don't want you and acts like they don't need you. It's frustrating. And then all the effort you're going to put into the individual kid. I'm going to ask you though to keep giving, because it's not going to be immediate. Some kids it will be. Some kids it will be. But some kids it's going to take months, and if you adopt, some kids years for you really to see return on your investment. Now, one of the analogies I always like to use, because everything to me is an analogy, everything is something else. 2008, what happened to the stock market? Yeah. What did a lot of people do?
Pulled out.
They pulled out, they sold, which meant they locked in their losses. Now, the people who stayed in, what has happened since then? Yeah, gone dramatically up. You recovered everything you lost and then some. And it's gonna go down again pretty soon. I'm just telling you that, it's not gonna stay there. But if we stay in, it comes back. And I think the same thing with our kids, is sometimes it feels like that's where we're going. But I tell you, if you sell, when you're going down, you're gonna lock in your losses, and you're never gonna see the upswing with these kids. And almost every kid, there's an upswing with them. I absolutely believe that. Okay, last thing Dr. Perry said, and we already kind of talked about this, but I want to talk about a little bit more. He said one of the most important pieces of advice he ever gives to foster parents don't scare the kids. Now, how might we scare kids even without meaning to? What do we do that could be frightening, even if you don't mean to be frightening?
Sometimes even just giving them a hug.
Yeah, so what we consider normal affection can be really triggering and frightening to them. Yeah. What else? Yeah, Stephen.
Watching sports.
Tell me more.
Yeah, I like to yell a lot.
Okay, yeah.
Good or bad.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. Whether it's good or bad. Yeah, I used to have a dog that used to freak out because we would yell during the sporting events. Yeah, so I think that's, no one's ever said that before, but that's a good one. The times you tend to get really enthusiastic about something or really frustrated, whether it's sports or whatever it is you're watching on TV or doing, that you know it's fine, but they may not know it's fine. Or just yelling in general. How many guys are yellers? Anybody? And it's okay. I mean, there's a lot of us who are. We grew up in a family that yells. Or just, if you're like my brother's family, they're just loud. They just are loud people. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, they just talk really loud. They yell around the house. They have the TV on really loud. They're just loud people. I find it alarming. And kids may too. But it's not bad. But it still might be frightening. Yes. Way back here, Sharon.
We adopted our son when he was 7.
Uh-huh.
He was raised for his first 7 years by his great-grandma, and she was very coddling.
Okay.
I'm a very matter-of-fact person.
Okay.
I talk to everybody in the same voice. For the first probably 5 years we had Jacob, he thought I was angry at him all the
Yeah.
time. Just because
Because you didn't talk to him like this,
I talked to him like he
honey.
was 2. I
Yeah.
talked to him like he was 7
Yeah,
or 8
or an
I
adult.
talked to him like I'm
Yeah.
talking to you right now.
Yeah.
He thought I was mad at him all the time.
Absolutely.
Because I just talked to him in a normal voice, and I didn't talk to him like he was used to being talked to by his great grandma in a very
Kind of sing-songy, sweet kind of way. Yeah, I think that's an excellent
It took
point.
me forever to figure that out.
Why he was always,
He shied away from me all the time.
yeah.
I just talked to him in a normal.
And I think that's a great point. So you're talking about his history, his nurturing history, but
Exactly.
even kids with trauma histories, they're more likely to interpret neutral tones as angry tones. So they may perceive us as being angry when in fact we're absolutely not angry. So that's an excellent point. Yes.
I think you have to be careful with any type of disagreement with your spouse.
Yes.
Even if it's mild, they might think like, oh, they're fighting,
Yeah.
they're gonna get divorced.
Yeah, or domestic violence,
Yeah.
or something. The kids they're taken out of the kids. I think this is a good point too, because some of us are like in our family we call it recreational bickering, where we just bicker just because. I don't really know why we do it, but it's just what we do. We just kind of bicker through things, and there's really never hurt feelings. There's no real anger behind it. It's just that's just how we communicate with each other. So yeah, so just normal. Disagreements within the family, the kids could perceive them as much more frightening. Jared, how tall are you?
6 foot.
6 foot. And then, oh no, he's not here anymore. Our 6'9" guy, they finished up last week. But some of you are tall people. And just standing, how tall are you? 6'2". So just standing up could be frightening to a kid.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can't, but can you do anything about being so tall? No.
Nothing reasonable.
Yeah, nothing reasonable. That's true, nothing reasonable. Yeah, nothing safe. But you can sit down. You can kneel down. You can think about the fact that sometimes just my physical presence can be frightening to children. How do I make myself less tall, less big, so that they are less frightened by me? So Kent Hoffman, who I did some training with for Circle of Security, he said one of the most important skills foster parents can have is how to track fear. And sometimes that fear is so fleeting across their face, you might miss it. So really being cued into how this kid expresses fear and pick it up when you see it. Remind me of your name?
Kylie.
Kylie.
I just thought of an example that I kind of experienced that, kind of played in. I was raised just by my mom, and we have a very small family, and my family is very kind of very sweet, very
Okay.
calm. They don't
Uh-huh.
yell at each other,
Uh-huh.
they avoid confrontation,
Yeah.
So when I was younger, I always remember I never heard men yelling because I didn't have the dad in the picture,
Mhm.
and the men in my family
Didn't yell.
never yell. They
Mhm.
were never mad. They didn't show that. And so I always remember growing up when I saw men who were angry or loud or anything.
Yeah.
That would always freak me out.
Really scare you. Yeah.
So I think that's something to
Yeah.
remember too.
And I think this is important because it's not necessarily if the situation is dangerous, it's how the child goes back to what we talked about the very first time of class, the subjective nature of the event. So if the child perceives it as frightening, it's frightening. And we want to take it seriously, and not just simply say, "Oh, it's fine, everything's fine." You just say, "Oh, that scared you, didn't it?" And one thing you can do too, if you are yelling, if you are a yeller, if you are a door slammer, if you are a cabinet slammer or pot banger, or what you can, when the kids come in your home, or even going back to what you said about hugging, when kids come in your home, say to them, "You know what? We're loud, we yell, but even sometimes when we're mad, we yell." And sometimes people slam doors, but you know what? We don't ever hurt each other. We don't ever do anything mean. The worst it gets is we yell sometimes. And I just want to let you know that because I don't want you to get scared when sometimes we yell. And if you do get scared, tell us you're scared. And we'll make sure you know that things are going to be okay. So think about your family culture and how you do things, and then, anticipate some stuff that will scare kids, and know too that some of the stuff you do now you don't know is scary, you're going to find out is scary. One thing I found out was I used to say, did any of your parents ever say, "I'm going to give you to the gypsies" when you were kids? Yeah, don't say that, especially not to our kids. Okay, I made that mistake once. Don't do that, especially with kids who've had a lot of transitions in their life. It's not good, because we just know we're joking, but these kids don't know you're joking, and so don't say that to children. It's not a good one. Okay, so let's. I remember I was going to show you this clip then. Okay, so this. So when Dr. Perry was talking about this, I was thinking about one of my favorite clips from probably one of my favorite movies, and this is also required viewing. So this is How to Train Your Dragon. Who has seen How to Train Your Dragon? Okay, absolutely, I love this movie. So this is the scene. I'm going to set up just real quick for those of you who haven't seen it. This is the scene where this young Viking, he's injured this dragon, and the dragons and the Vikings are mortal enemies. But he's injured this dragon, and this boy is really interested and kind of wants to know about the dragon, even though they're considered really dangerous. And the dragon is injured and can't fly away, so the boy has the opportunity to kind of get to know the dragon. So this is kind of their first real big interaction. And as Dr. Perry was talking about these things, I was thinking about this scene. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the scene from How to Train Your Dragon. And this boy, Hiccup, the boy, he demonstrates all of these, including the don't scare one. He demonstrates he's beautiful. He also involves food, which is usually a good thing too. So. I was delicious. You guys, such a funny movie. All right, so whenever you push an analogy too far, it always falls apart. So I don't want to push it too far. But a couple things. One is the knife in the lake was, I'm harmless. I'm not going to hurt you, and our kids need to know that we are completely safe toward them. And then the regurgitated fish. Our kids are going to give us what they have. Our kids are going to give us what they value. It may not be what you want. It may not be what you expected. It may not be what you dreamed of, but it's what they have. And we miss gifts from our kids all the time because it's not what we expected. So watch out for those little things that they give you that are not things that you thought you were going to get, or even if you don't want to recognize them for what they are. And then the whole drawing thing, and him stepping on the line and him growling at him, that our kids are going to do things that don't make any sense to us, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they're not still important, even if they don't make sense to us. So, okay. So now we're going to, So this time, leave one thing behind. Move at least 2 seats away from where you're currently sitting. Don't sit in a seat in which you previously sat tonight. Run. The most we've ever had in this room is 78. This was really hard with 78. I think tonight we're probably about 50, 55. Yeah, as long as it's a different, yeah, absolutely.
The more the better.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, you won't be there too long, so. All right, so we're going to kind of talk about 2 of the outcomes. When we see secure attachment, we usually see good outcomes with initiative and good outcomes with emotional regulation too. So we're going to talk a little bit about those 2 things. The definition that this curriculum uses of initiative is I can do it even if I need a little help. So I'm going to tell you a story of 2 dogs. So there was a researcher whose name I can't remember, probably because he liked to be mean to dogs. I just have blocked him out. He had a dog in a kennel, and this dog has on a shock collar. And at unpredictable intervals, so sometimes it's a long time between shocks, sometimes it's a short time, sometimes it's in between, a shock gets administered to the dog. Sometimes the shocks last a very short time, sometimes they last much longer, okay? This is the world this guy lives in. This guy also lives in a kennel with a shock collar, but he has 2 things this guy doesn't have. He has a bell to alert him to the fact the shock is coming, and he has a switch on the floor that when he hits that switch, the shock stops. Now I guarantee you the first time he hit that switch, it was inadvertent. Dogs don't really know about switches, so he's probably like, I'm getting shocked, and hit the switch, turned off the shock. Payne's a strong teacher. He learned really quickly, oh, that's how I get the shock to stop. So what happens eventually when the bell sounds? He goes right to the switch, yeah. They now move him to a different kennel. In this new kennel, there's still a bell to let him know the shock is coming, but there no longer is a switch. Now what he has to do is he has to go from one side of the room to the other side of the room to get the shock to stop. So the bell sounds, he's like, oh, here it comes, shock starts. He's like, oh, what do I do? And he starts moving around, and he realizes, oh, when I went from here to here, the shock stopped. So what does he do the next time the bell sounds? He goes to the other side of the kennel, okay? They now put this guy in the kennel he was just in. All he has to do is go from one side of the room to the other, the shock will stop. Bell sounds, what does he do? Nothing. There's no association. Shock starts, what does he do? He lays down and whimpers. You dumb dog, just move around, try to go to the other side of the room, it'll be fine. Why doesn't he even try? You know the research. Yeah, it is called learned helplessness. And what this dog has learned is nothing I have ever done. Because I guarantee you, the first time, like this dog, he tried to figure out how to get it to stop. But nothing he did changed his world. So at some point, he begins to believe there's nothing I can do to make a difference, even when he's in a situation when there is something he can do to make a difference. And you guys are going to get kids in your home who are going to do, this is what they're going to have. So you're going to say to them, let's unload the dishwasher. And they're going to say, I can't. Let's go in the backyard and kick the soccer ball around. And they're going to say, I can't. Let's work on your math homework. I can't. And if you're like me, what are you going to say? Yeah, I'm really impatient with I can't. And it's not helpful. So what are you going to do that's going to be better than me? What are you going to do? Because I trust you're going to be better than me. When you have a kid who says, I can't to everything, because why does he say that? He truly believes he can't, because nothing he's ever done has ever taught him that anything he ever does changes his world. So how are you going to help him start to believe? And the opposite of this is a sense of self-efficacy, a sense of believing that I do have power in my world. I do have a power to make a difference in my own world and the world of others. How are you going to help him to believe that?
Do it with him?
Do it with him, yeah. And what if he's 11 years old?
Do it with him.
Do it with him. So this is where it becomes really critical that we don't compare the kid that is in your home now to the kid you may have had before. Like if you've had a biological kid or a kid you've adopted and you've had years with them to teach them things, don't make any assumptions about what our kids know and what they feel like they can do. And so don't say, well, my 11-year-old could unload the dishwasher. Just do it with them. Okay, what else can you do? And this, and not just one time. Probably do it with them for many, many times. What else can you do?
Celebrate any small accomplishments.
Yeah, really pay attention to those small steps, those small efforts that they make. And depending on your kid, like we had this one foster mom, she had remember Cheer? Do you guys remember Cheer, the old laundry detergent? She had a box, like, when it was in a box laundry, and it was called, she had a Cheer, and she actually had in there little cheers that she would do for the kids. And so when the kids would do something, she'd say, I want to cheer for you. And so she'd give them the box, and the kid would pick out their favorite cheer, and then she'd do it. And the favorite one always involves some kind of like full firework thing she did with her fingers and stuff. It was really funny. So figure out for your kid, what kind of celebration works. Because some kids are not going to want a big deal, and some kids are going to want a big deal. But all of them are going to want some acknowledgement of the effort that they're making. What else can you do? So do it with them multiple times. Celebrate small successes in a way that the kid appreciates. What else can you do? Help them start to believe I can do things. Erin?
Give simple tasks.
Yeah.
Not expect.
Yeah. And this goes back once again to developmental understanding that that kid may be very different from your kid in what they can do. So don't overwhelm their developmental capacity. What can they do? And set them up for success instead of setting up for failure. Absolutely. So just put the forks away. This is where the forks go. There's big ones and little ones. What else can you do? What about you? How do you set an example for your kids of self-efficacy?
Do you find something that neither one of you has done and maybe you put it together?
Great idea. No one's ever had that before. I think that's a great idea.
Let's learn how to whatever.
Yeah. You know what I don't know how to do? I don't know how to jump on a pogo stick. That might be mildly dangerous. Whatever. Yeah, say, I don't know how to do
Or
this.
even something that they, like if they do
Yeah.
Almost take away
Yeah,
teach me.
yeah, because I don't know how to do everything. Yeah, so showing them that you're willing to learn something new too. I think that's fantastic. I had a friend of mine that one of their mottos in their family is, I can do hard things. And one day she came over to my house, and I'm a big sugar cookie maker. Like any holiday all holidays call for sugar cookies. I have like a gajillion cookie cutters. And anyway, so I always make them for her because she loves sugar cookies, but she never makes them because she said, oh my gosh, it's such a pain to make them. So anyway, she was over at my house one day, and picking up sugar cookies, and she said to me, she said, you know, if I'm trying to teach my kids that we do hard things, I need to start making sugar cookies. And I says, yeah, maybe. So, you know, to think about what do I shy away from in my life because it's hard, and taking opportunities to learn new things. I think that's fantastic, because then you're an example. And then when you're vulnerable enough to say, I don't know how to do this, and I need to learn how to do it, or I know how to do it, but it's hard for me and I don't really enjoy it, but I'm going to do it anyway. That vulnerability on your part really helps them to be vulnerable and admit they don't know how to do things and be willing to learn how to do things. I think that's great advice. Anybody else? Any other ideas? Okay. This is once again where patience is going to come into. All right, so the next outcome we're going to talk about is emotional regulation. I'm going to show you this next slide. Actually, no, before I show you this next slide, let me tell you how what we see. Okay, so emotional regulation. You are holding a crying baby in your arms, and you are facing the crying baby. Show me your face when you're looking at the crying baby. I want to see your face. Okay, I'm looking for the face. Close. Okay. I want to see the face. Okay, not that face. Okay. Okay. I'm looking for the face. Show me your face. Oh, you're grinning at me now. Show me the face. Okay. Okay. Do it again. Okay, and make the noise. Cause I heard the noise. Oh, she made the noise. Do the noise. Someone did the noise. Okay, you did the noise. Yeah. Oh, we do that, and this is actually called the woe face because when you look at him. Okay, now did they teach you in the hospital to do that? They say, okay, when your baby cries, look at him with a concerned look on your face and go, oh, did they tell you that? No, why do you do that?
Soothing.
It's soothing.
Learned trait.
Yeah, you learn how to do it. And we're usually not conscious of it. We just do it. Oh. Okay, what does it do when you do that to a baby? What are you doing? Okay, empathizing. So how come I don't do this if I want to empathize? I know, it sucks to be a baby. It's so hard. It's your fourth puppy diaper today. I know. Why don't I do that? And sometimes I do. But why do I generally not do that?
That makes them cry harder.
Yeah, why? Why does it make them cry harder?
Because if you're crying, then they are crying.
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
go and
Absolutely.
do
This goes back to wherever Diana is. She keeps moving around. Wherever Diana is, what she was saying earlier about being a competent adult. That if we're freaking out, because they're freaking out, then we're not much use to them. So we are no longer bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. Okay, do I want my baby to be sad? So how come I don't do this? Come on, come on, come on, happy, happy, happy. Where's my happy girl? Come on, come on. How come I don't do that? And you better not do that. This, by the way, is called overbright. And whenever I meet somebody who does this, I'm really nervous because something's not right, okay? Why do we not do this to babies when they're crying?
Because it's not an appropriate response.
It's not. Why is it not an appropriate response?
Just because it doesn't, you're not like demonstrating that you understand what they're feeling.
Yeah, this is called an affective mismatch. And babies know that this does not match what's happening inside of them internally. They know it. And Beatrice Beebe, who's one of the most famous researchers in this field, she pioneered the split screen where she would film mom and baby or dad and baby. They'd actually be face to face, but she'd split the screen so you could watch them interact like this. And any parent that persists in an affective mismatch, the babies eventually will turn away, and it's a really good way to get an avoidant baby. They'll start pulling away from the parent. They won't even look at the parent eventually. So the woe face is actually the balance between those two things. It's one, it's empathy, and it's also, I'm not overwhelmed by your sadness or your fear or your anger or your excitement or whatever it is. I can manage your emotion. So the woe face is saying to them, oh, I know you've got stinky, stinky diapers, and I know you're sad, but I'm bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind, and I got this. So you're going to be okay. And then, over a little bit, and then they start to kind of break a smile, and we, oh yeah, oh, there you go. Now feel better, huh? Yeah. So we take them from that place of dysregulation to a place of more regulation. And once again, like the cycle we talked about, this happens all the time. Now, I'm totally getting ahead of myself or behind myself, I'm not sure which. So you're holding that baby. Now, do you just do this? Oh, do you just do that? No, because it'd be weird. So this is, and I'm going to pass, well, I'll wait till after we stop moving around, which will happen after the break. So Daniel Siegel, he said, in this moment, the whoa face, so the look on my face, the tone of my voice, this is all right brain to right brain communication. This is giving this baby access to my right brain, which is, and we have to be really careful, like I said, once again, about saying that, one part of the brain is only about one thing, or, that only that part is about that thing. But primarily where we experience our emotions is right brain stuff. And in this moment, I am giving her access to my right brain to help her to understand and to be with her own emotional state, which is really how we learn how to self-soothe. So the idea that I can put a baby to cry herself to sleep in a room for an hour or two at night and pretend that I'm teaching her to self-soothe is completely inaccurate. The way children learn how to self-soothe is by having access to an older, a bigger, stronger, wiser, kind adult. So in this moment, she has access to my right brain, which is slightly terrifying because mine's not always great, but she has access to my right brain, and she's patterning her right brain architecture on mine, which will predict to some degree how she will live with emotion the rest of her life. But I also am going to use language. I'm going to say to her, oh, the saddest girl in the world, or the saddest baby. And I'm going to tell her why she's sad, because she got poopy diapers. So this is now left brain information. So in this moment, not only am I giving her access to my right brain, I'm giving her left brain information. Language, linear, logical, meaning-making part of the brain. So in Daniel Siegel's word, I'm giving her a whole brain experience of sadness. I'm meeting her on the right side with empathy, tone of voice, look on my face, and I'm giving her information about that emotion, what it's called, context, why she feels that way, so she can actually experience it this way. And Daniel Siegel believes that one of the components of secure attachment is a whole brain experience of emotion, any emotion, all emotion. Now, this next slide, I left it in here because it drives me nuts. So it says here, the goal of the caregiver is to regulate the child in infancy, and then we shift the responsibility to the child. How old is that kid? 6. Yeah. Can he regulate himself 100% emotionally all the time? No, it's stupid. How many of you guys as adults are 100% self-regulating? You don't need anyone ever. And if you think that's you, okay. We're not. We're not designed to be. We are designed, we are hardwired to need each other, especially around emotional regulation. Okay, you have been in a car accident. It's severe. Luckily, no one is mortally wounded, but you are severely wounded. You have at least a broken leg. You are by yourself when the accident occurs. You are taken by ambulance to the hospital. Who do you want them to call first?
My spouse.
Your spouse. Okay. Most married people, it's going to be a spouse. It might be a parent. It might be a sibling. It might be a best friend. We're all going to want somebody there. Why? Are y'all big babies and can't deal with life on your own? No, why do you want somebody there? Yeah. And how do you feel when your spouse walks in the door?
Excited.
Excited? Relief. You feel calmer just because they walk in the door. You're going to be okay. It's going to be okay because this person's here now. Okay, you have just won the cowboy lottery. You've won $710,000. Life-changing, but maybe not job-quitting, okay? You're alone when you find out you win. Who's the first person you call? Most of us, it's the same person we call in the car accident. Why is it the same person? Totally different event. Why is it still the same person for most of us? What do you want in that situation?
Someone to celebrate.
You want someone to share it with. You're not going to call the person who says, gambling is immoral. You should give the money back, Or how much is it going to be after taxes? That's my mom. If I called my mom, that's what she would say. Well, think about taxes, it's the first thing she would say. Yeah, this is absurd. The idea of self-regulation, and that term gets used a lot, and it really makes me nuts. The actual term in the literature is co-regulation of affect, which is a little bit longer to say than self-regulation. But what it really means is that, yes, I can regulate on my own sometimes when I need to, because sometimes you got to hold it together. And as kids get older, they're able to do a little bit more of that on their own. But I am not raising a kid so that someday they won't need anybody else. I'm raising a kid who knows that there are trusted others that they can rely on when they need to, and they can be, because think about this, if I'm somebody who says, I don't need anybody, I'm good, if I'm emotional, I go for a run. I don't call anyone. How am I as a relational partner? Spouse, friend, sibling. What happens when someone comes to me with an emotional need?
Closed off.
Yeah.
What do you want me to do about it?
Yeah, what do you want me to do about it? Go for a run. You should take up running. It's great. Yeah. So then I'm also not going to be really open to others if I can't, if I don't know how to lead people. So it's really a two-way thing. So co-regulation of affect is probably a much better phrase in this situation. Okay. All right, Sunday I gotta sit down and actually get the timer and figure out how long to put every timer for. Okay, this time leave one thing behind. No, take one thing with you. Leave everything else behind. Move to a seat at least 2 seats from where you're currently sitting. So when they said they were going to be filming the classes, they said, just do your class like normal. So I thought, well, this is the night we move around, so we'll do it like normal. Wait for folks to get set down. While we're waiting for the last couple folks to get set down, just so you know tonight, Alicia, where's Alicia? She's done tonight, yay! And Brianna and Andre, wherever they went, are done tonight, yay! And then these two guys back here, who I don't know who you are. Okay, you guys are done tonight. They're from Northern Region. Are you done tonight? Molly's done tonight too. Okay, yay! Okay, very nice. And my printer's still on the fritz, so I know I emailed Brianna and Alicia theirs, and Brian will email yours, and I'll get yours to you too. Okay. Okay, this time, sorry, I did not measure the time very good. This time, don't take anything. Leave all your stuff. Move at least, except for your clothes, move at least 2 seats from where you're currently sitting. Don't sit in the seat which you previously sat tonight. It's been nice to know you. And then Dawn's done tonight too. You done Wednesday, yeah. I wanted to check and make sure that was right. All right. Okay, now raise your hand. For those of you who are here and married, raise your hand if you stayed next to your spouse. Okay, if your hand is up, move. Well, one of you move. One of you move. I want you to trade places with somebody. The goal is to not be sitting by your spouse. Okay. Now, for those of you who are here and married and your spouse is here, why did you stay with your spouse? Okay, a sense of comfort. Okay. All right, so let me tell you about my timer. It's not battery operated, it's just one of the rotary ones, so it'll go all night. So do you guys want to keep playing? No, how come not? Say it again? It's disruptive. Okay, it's disruptive. Why else not?
Run out of things.
You've run out of things. There's nothing else to leave behind. Okay, why else?
It's awkward.
What's awkward about it?
Well, because you're comfortable sitting, you've got your stuff, and then you have to keep getting up, and now you don't know where your stuff is.
Yeah, yeah. And then you're sitting by someone you don't really know.
Yeah.
So I have a panic disorder. And
Oh.
Right now I am the verge of like.
Where's your spouse?
massive-
Where's your husband? Yeah.
Because nothing that is comforting to me is with
Is with you. You have my permission to move if you need to. Yeah, I had a woman in class one time, and I only knew this because she told me that she had been in a really severe car accident, like just a couple years previous. Her brother was killed in the accident, and niece or nephew was killed. It was a horrific accident, and so when I moved them, I made sure her husband was really close to her because this is. I mean, even though, and we'll talk about this in a second, you realize this is a object lesson. It still is dysregulating to not have anything that's comforting to you normally. Yeah.
And we're wondering if the shock collar comes next.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Let's see what happens if I do this. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I promise it's not going to get that bad. Okay. Now, Sharon mentioned your stuff. How much of your current mental energy is being used in keeping track of where your stuff is? Yeah. Depending on what the stuff is. Varying degrees of some mental energy is being spent in keeping track of it and making sure no one's touching it. Okay. How do you feel about the stuff that's in front of you? Okay, you got a cookie. You're good. Okay. Yeah. But most of us are like, I don't want. Most of you are sitting back. A lot of you are sitting with your arms folded. You don't want anyone to think that you're gonna touch their stuff. So you're not comfortable where you are now because you don't have your stuff because someone else's stuff is there too. Okay. Why else don't you want to keep playing? Bless you. Jared?
I don't like being your toy.
Okay. So this is the question. Am I doing this just to annoy you? A little bit, but that's not the primary reason. But yeah, but it's kind of fun. Brian up north, I told him about this activity. He's like, "Oh, that's great." Just to annoy the class a little bit. Yeah, so I mean, it's not fun. There's nothing, you're not getting anything out of it. What's the point? Oh, I was going to ask you something. I can't remember. It's gone now. It will come back to me. So what is the point? Am I doing this just to annoy you, Stephanie?
How our kids will feel.
Yeah. Yeah. So whatever degree of anxiety, awkwardness, frustration, panic you're feeling now, our kids are going to feel to a much greater degree. Ken. And then, is it Philippe?
I did get a better seat.
Oh, you got a better seat. So no, but this is good because this gets brought up sometimes. Is some people find something more positive about it, like, oh, I got a seat I liked, or whatever. That sometimes people are able to use it. Oh, I remember I was going to ask you, anybody cheat? And actually, I know Brianna cheated because unless she's eating someone else's food. Okay, what did you keep with you?
Oh no, I cheated. I stayed in the same.
Oh, you haven't moved the whole time?
I had a baby.
But you have a baby. Okay, so I wanted to bring this up though too. That tonight, because of the filming, because of their equipment, we're a little bit even squishier than normal in our big group. So that complicates this. Stephanie has her husband on Skype, and so she had to kind of carry him around. You have the baby, which limits your ability to engage in this. So each of us have different circumstances that make this activity even more difficult or less difficult for some of us. Say it again?
I cheated.
What did you do?
My phone and keys.
Okay, why?
Because I wouldn't remember where I left it.
And that's pretty important stuff. Yeah, your phone and your keys. Okay, Ken.
I just left my my cup, my trash, and everything.
Uh-huh. Say it again?
I just left my trash as I went.
Okay, please pick it up at the end of the night. Because I do find people do that. I find people's trash all over the place. Yeah, so people are creative about what they leave behind to make it easier to leave stuff behind. And then, okay, anybody else cheat? Anybody else keep their purse with them? I know Brianna kept her dinner with them. Keep your wallet with you, keep keys with you, your phone with you. So a lot of you cheated. Why did you cheat? You big cheaters? Why did you cheat?
Comfort letters.
This is a room of 70 people. I'm sorry, I don't know these people.
Okay, you don't trust the people.
I apologize.
Okay, yeah. You don't really know. You don't really know who the people are, so you don't trust the situation enough to leave your stuff that is valuable to you that you need. Yeah, who else? Yeah, Stephen.
It's personal stuff.
Yeah.
It's always on me.
Yeah,
It's part of me.
yeah, it's your keys, your phone, your wallet. It's stuff you always have. I'm not going to leave that behind because she says to leave it behind. I'm not going to do that. Okay, comfort food. Yeah, you're in the middle of your dinner. Yeah, and I'm not going to not eat my dinner because she says that. So my rules kind of arbitrary? Yes. Do they take into account your needs and what's going to be best for you? Not really. So your defiance is not really defiance of my rules. It's in service of what works for you and what you need. And so many of our kids get labeled as rule breakers and as defiant and whatever. And in reality, it's just because the rules are stupid or the rules are harmful.
Well, one of the things, like, I kept the stuff in my pockets because I didn't consider that something that was out to be
Yeah.
moved, and so the rule wasn't really
Yeah,
defined.
it wasn't like you're trying to break the rule.
Yeah, it just wasn't
She
defined.
didn't say I had to take stuff out of my pockets.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing too, is that sometimes kids break rules not because they're intending to, but because they don't really understand the rule or the reasoning behind the rule. I think that's a very good point too. Jared?
I know that the more rules you made, the more unwilling I was to follow any of your others.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this happens too. You start piling up. You guys have seen the research on self-control, and the more claims made on self-control, the less self-control we have. That even just offering someone a piece of chocolate cake that they turn down makes them less likely to be able to control themselves in another situation. That, yeah, when we have a lot of rules, we start picking and choosing because we probably have limited ability to really fulfill all of the rules that are there. Okay, so I'm going to leave you where you are because I want, oh, Erin.
I have a question about this exercise.
Yeah.
How much or what are kids typically able to bring with them?
Which is an excellent question, and I think that's a great point. Some kids will have stuff. They will have stuff with them. Some kids will have nothing with them, depending upon the circumstances. So you're going to have anything in between a kid who has way more stuff than you think they should be bringing, and kids who have almost nothing. I mean, we've had kids. We had a little girl one time, I remember, who had on a shirt and pants, no underwear, just a shirt and pants. That's all she had. And so sometimes you have situations like that. So I can't predict, what's going to happen with any given situation. But the goal is, if we know they're going to be removed, to try to get some of their stuff. But also think about this. If you're the parent and they want to take your child's favorite toy, I don't want to give you their favorite toy, because that means it's more likely you're going to keep my kid, or a bunch of their clothes. So sometimes parents are resistant to give stuff up because it means it's just one more evidence that they're not getting their kid back. And so try to be careful about judging parents too much if they're unwilling to give stuff, because that stuff may be the closest thing they have left to that kid, and the tie that makes them believe they might get their kids back, which I hope they do. But it's a good question. And the thing I do want to say is so I think this is a good point. Do you care about your stuff? Like, if I made you leave here tonight and you couldn't get anything that you left behind, would it matter to you? It's just stuff. You can buy more of it. What's it matter to you? Saturday, I told you guys I'm living in my brother's basement, and we're about a week away from being able to move in. And we moved a bunch of stuff into the garage on Saturday. And I'm like, oh, my stuff. And it's just stuff. But it's our stuff, and it matters. So when these kids come in your home, if they have stuff, treat it like gold. I don't care if it's a holey shirt. I don't care if it's a broken toy. I don't care if it's a smelly blanket, which we're going to talk about next week. It's their stuff, and it matters to them. And if and when they do leave your home, make sure that stuff goes with them, because our kids lose a lot of things in foster care. And we may think it's just a blanket, but it's their blanket. It matters to them. So treat their stuff like gold. And I promise you're going to get your stuff back, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you where you are right now, because I want you to be a little uncomfortable for this next video we're going to watch. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of hope, though, that at the end of the video, it'll be break time and comfort food time. And it will also be time to get your stuff back and your spouses back and your seats back, and I won't do this to you anymore, I promise. Okay, so just hang in there for another about 15 minutes. So this video I'm going to show you guys, this came out a few years ago, and for some of you, some of you may have seen this. This is, if any of you follow anything foster care adoption related on social media, you may have seen this, or you may have seen this in some other setting. But this is a short film called Removed that was done probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Beautifully done, difficult to watch, difficult to absorb. I want you to think about a couple things. Think about your home. Think about your routines, think about your culture, think about the way you do things, your way of managing conflict and emotion, and think what it would be like to have this girl dropped into your home, and what you would do to help her, and also what you would do to help your family and help your home, with her bringing what she's going to bring into your home. And just think about her experience too, and then we'll talk about it for a few minutes after. What would it be like to have her in your home? A couple days, the first couple weeks, first couple months? Brianna?
I think it'd be extremely painful. I can't imagine not taking a lot of that personally.
Mm-hmm.
And just thinking, I'm not connecting with her. I don't know what she needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just being able to know what her needs are and meet those needs.
Yeah. And yet you can see why she's not going to trust you. You can see why she's not going to get close to you, why she's not going to, respond to your nurturing. You can. I mean, because here we have the origin story. Unfortunately, you guys don't get a little video like this with every kid you're going to get in your home. It'd be nice if we did, but like Brianna said, you're just going to be guessing. You're going to be guessing, what happened in this kid's past that is keeping her angry, is keeping her so hurt, is keeping her so mistrustful. But it's going to hurt you, and I think it should hurt you. If you could not take that personally, you're a robot, and you probably shouldn't be in foster care. That your pain is a gift, and it makes you a real person. Now the trick, of course, is what do I do with that pain so I can keep doing what I need to do for this kid? And that's where that self-care, your relationships, your attached relationships become really critical. So you have someone you can go to help manage your pain so you can continue to be what this girl needs you to be. What else would it be like to have her in your home? What are you going to do with her? All right.
It goes back to the 4 steps. It's just keep trying to make that connection,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just giving her space, but make her know that we are there.
Yeah. Keep coming back. Even while you give her space, you're going to keep coming back. Keep coming back. Predictably keep coming back. Thank you. Yes?
I thought it was cool that she taught her how to do something.
Yeah.
So she could build some pride and self-esteem.
Yeah.
Accomplishment.
Yeah, and it's also relationship building too. And I love what Sharon, what you said about just being really matter of fact. This kid, if I'm all lovey-dovey with her, I'm going to get smacked. That your approach with her is probably going to be best, especially if I do it with like a teaching thing, like, let me show you how to make eggs, and it's just very matter of fact. I'm going to talk to her like another human being and try to keep the sweetness down, level down a little bit. With a kid like this, I'm probably going to want to do that. It doesn't mean I'm not nurturing. It doesn't mean I'm not kind. It just means I'm probably not sweet, if you understand what I mean. What did she really need? Her brother. Yeah. Now there's a part 2 to this that I really don't like. And you guys can look it up on your own and watch it on your own if you'd like to, but I don't love it. But I think one of the biggest things that made a difference for her is a foster mom who didn't quit and a foster mom who realized that she needed her brother. And how many of you guys thought the foster mom was calling to have her removed? And how many of you thought, no, if only you knew? Because we knew why she got so upset about the dress. But the foster mom didn't know. Now she doesn't know why it was a trigger, but how did she know she hit a trigger? Yeah, it made no sense. That what she did in response to that situation made absolutely no sense. And that's a really good clue you've hit a trigger. Now you may not know exactly what it is or why it was a trigger, but she knew she hit a trigger. And thank heaven she wasn't calling to have her removed, that she was calling to say she needs her brother, because she absolutely needed her brother to be with her. And needed a foster mom who didn't quit and understood her. Okay, get your stuff back and your seats back and your spouses back, and I'll see you in 15 minutes. Or actually, let's say 16 minutes. So I'll see you at 7:40. We'll come back and we'll finish up talking about grief and loss. So we have about an hour left tonight, and so your Monday's almost over. Just hang in there. So I'm going to get the roll started around. And I know a few of you are here. I know that the Boguses are out there for in-service, and some of you are visiting from other regions if you're not on the roll. So just, if you're not on the roll, just add your name to the roll. And then if you are on the roll, don't add your name to the roll, because once again, that confuses me. Okay, so, and then I do need your releases too. So when you get these, just, if you would mind leaving them for me at the front of the table, I'd appreciate it. All right, so we're going to kind of finish up talking about when kids come into our home, some of the ways we can support them, understanding that we're choosing to do this, and they're not choosing this. You know, they're not in classes like you guys are, learning how to be in foster care. You know, they're not filling out applications. They just get yanked out of their home and dumped right into your home. We had a cute foster Facebook group, and she said, it's my first day as a foster parent. Although she wrote foster peanut. My first day as a foster peanut, and everyone knew what she meant. And she said, and I'm already failing. And she just talked about how hard it was, and she had great support from the other families talking about how hard that first few days is. And it's not just hard for her; it's hard for the kids too. And so that it's just going to be hard because it's their life is disrupted hugely. Our life is going to be disrupted too, even though you've chosen to do this. There'll still be some disruption. So understanding what's kind of happening for them can help us a little bit to help things be a little bit less difficult. Now, there's a concept that comes out of the NCTSN curriculum on trauma called the invisible suitcase, which goes back to kind of what Erin was saying, what are they going to bring with them? Well, we don't know materially what they're going to bring with them, but we do know emotionally what they're going to bring with them. They're all going to bring their own suitcase of emotional difficulties and history. Now, of these, which one are we going to spend the rest of tonight talking about? Loss and grief. Okay, very good. I had one group was like, I don't know, fear, sadness, confusion. Like, that made it big. So loss and grief. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about how we process grief. So anybody familiar with this? The grief, stages of grief, anybody familiar with that? Okay, it's been around for a long time. In fact, it's been around for about almost 50 years. So in the 1960s, there was a woman named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who was working with terminally ill patients. And as she worked with them, she started to notice that there were really predictable phases that they went through as they came to terms with their impending death. And so in 1971, she published a book called On Death and Dying, in which she articulated those stages of coming to terms with one's own impending death. And it was widely read. It was a New York Times bestseller. And it was not only read by people who worked with people who were dying, it was read by people who work in grief. And those people said, okay, this isn't just about the people who are dying. Who else is it about? The people left behind, yeah, the loved ones, the people who love that person who is dying or has died. So very quickly, I would say within a couple of years, this was adopted as the model of grief. And so you had people who worked in grief, maybe they were a brand new social worker or something who just got their license, or a therapist who just got their license, and they said, oh, 5 easy steps to grief. Okay, they put their shingle out, someone come in and they say, okay, right now you're in shock and denial, you'll be there for about 2 to 3 weeks, then you'll be really angry for 3 to 6 months, and you'll bargain for a week or two, you'll be really sad for 3 to 6 months, and then, the sun will come out and everything will be fine. Is that how it actually works? No. How does it actually work in reality? In real lived experience.
Everyone's different.
Everyone's different, which means what?
Which means that you'll be in any of the stages longer than any of the others.
Okay, so you cannot necessarily predict how long one person may experience one stage over another because everyone's different. Okay, Janet?
You don't necessarily experience those stages in that order.
Yeah.
And you also can go back.
Yes.
It's cyclical.
Yes, so a stage model predicts that it's progressive, not regressive. What we know is that grief is often regressive, meaning that we feel like we make progress, and then all of a sudden we're thrown back into an earlier experience that we thought we were done with. And then also, people don't necessarily experience them in the same order. Okay, how else is this not necessarily correct? Diana?
You can also feel them at the same time.
Yes. So a stage model predicts that you're only in one stage at a time, but can I be angry and sad at the same time?
Yes.
Yeah, or can I be in shock and anger at the same time? Absolutely. So this, years ago I changed it from stages of grief to expressions of grief because it's very clear model that we are not in one discrete place at any given time, that we are experiencing multiple emotions at the same time. Stephanie?
And a trigger can send you right back to the beginning.
Yeah, so once again, the idea of it being regressive. Even if someone gets, and the word that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross originally used was acceptance, which makes sense if I'm thinking about dealing with my own death. But when I'm the person left behind, we never really get there. So she changed the word to resolution, but that it still implies a sense of ending, a sense of finality. But like Stephanie and Janet said, reconstruction, this idea that even if I work my way through this process, something can happen that can actually throw me back. So even though I reconstruct a new life with the pieces that are left of my life, that loss is still a part of that new life. And that loss can get triggered, and I can go back again. Okay, other ways, this is not always accurate. Aaron? Oh, I thought you had your hand, sorry. Anybody else? How else is it?
More extreme or less extreme depending on the individual as well.
Yeah, their expressions or their feelings, absolutely. Because we all know people who, they are just quiet. They're just quiet with their grief. It doesn't mean they don't grieve. It just means they just are quieter. And other people who are lying on the grave sobbing. And it is different. And one's not better or worse than the other. It's just simply different. Absolutely. Other reasons, other ways this may be different for people than the way it's articulated. So we talk about this in class, and this came across my social media feed. And I know those of you in the back can't see it very well. This came across my social media feed a few months ago, and I sent it to the other. I sent this slide to the other trainers, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's perfect," because this is actually probably more what it's like. That it's not this clean, step-by-step, linear, progressive journey. It's a mess. It's confusing. It's scary. It's overwhelming. It's unpredictable. It is not this.
Turn my ear again.
It is this. It's a mess. So how do you help that person? If you're confronted with a grieving individual, which, by the way, can I say that we are hardwired to run from pain. So when we see someone in pain, what do we want to do? We want to do one of two things usually, most of us. We want to fix it, we want to make it stop, or we want to get away from it. And that's just natural. It's just hardwired in us as humans. There's nothing wrong with us because that's our instinct. Understanding neither of those things are helpful. What can we do? Brianna?
This looks like a pathway, and so I just think initially we want to walk with them on that pathway because they have to experience, maybe not everything there, but that's the pathway that they will experience.
Yeah.
And the other thing is to help them identify what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
And
normalize it for them, yeah. That this is normal, that what you're feeling is it's okay, there's nothing wrong with you, and you have permission to feel it. And I love you said to walk with them. Dan Webster, how many of you guys had Dan do your initial consultations? He's a tall guy, came out to your house, he's a great guy. He, when he went through his master's in social work, he said the most helpful class he ever took was a class on grief. And in that class, they introduced a term called companioning, which is simply being with somebody. It's not fixing it, it's not solving it, it's not even trying to alleviate it. It's simply not making them do that alone, being with them. Ken?
It's like you're, I can't remember which class it was, but it was somebody was down in the pit.
Yeah.
One person goes down.
The empathy.
The other ones just kind of get over it.
Yeah, yeah.
It goes hand in hand. You got to kind of help.
Yeah. So this is an excellent point, and this is from Pema Chandra's work. I never can say her last name right, and also Brene Brown's work. That if we are going to walk this with somebody, is it going to be easy and pleasant and carefree and breezy for us? No. Even if we're not the ones who've experienced a loss? No, it's going to be painful because we're getting down in the pit. We're allowing our darkness that we have in our life anyway, whether it's due to past losses or past traumas or fear of losses in our future. Because when we're confronted with someone who's lost something, it reminds us either of losses we've had or losses we're going to have. And so it's a hard place to be, both personally but also relationally. So then, if I'm willing to get down in the pit, if I'm willing to walk with this person through their journey, what do we have to do to take care of ourselves so that we don't get overwhelmed with someone else's pain? Say it again. Know our triggers, yeah. Understanding that some of this stuff, whether it's cultural issues or our past loss or fears or relational stuff, that some of this stuff may trigger stuff in us, and to be aware of, is this me or is this them? So what are my triggers? What else can I do to take care of myself?
Set a limit for yourself. Like, you can't take this whole journey on in one step. It may take a week, it may take a month, and I met this kid, or whoever's going through it has easily had more time to process it.
Yeah.
If they're sharing it with you, you're not expected to be right where they are at that same moment.
Absolutely. So boundaries. That it's okay, it doesn't mean you're an uncaring person if you say, I need to take a break. I need to go do something else for a while. and to have boundaries of what you can manage, because we all have limits. And boundaries, and this is from Brené Brown's work too, that in order to have compassion, we have to have boundaries. Because if we don't have boundaries, we start to get burned out, we start to get resentful, we start to get angry, and that doesn't help anybody. And so we need to be able to have limits and boundaries for ourselves so we can continue to be compassionate and continue to be present when we're able to. Absolutely. What else can you do to take care of yourself, Janet?
Other things, other sources of support and refreshment for yourself.
Absolutely. That you need people who are companioning you. You need those attachment figures of people you call. And then other, what was the other thing you said? Refreshment. Yeah, so whether it's meditation or yoga, or if you have a faith practice, a spiritual practice, exercise for a lot of people is really important. That those things that renew and refresh you, that you don't, and this is a great place for boundaries, that you don't give up those things. That you continue those things in your life so you can continue to really be effective for somebody else. Absolutely. Any other ideas about how you can take care of yourself as you companion someone through this journey? I think one thing that helps me a lot is knowing that, because going back to this slide again, how long does your work give you if there's a death of someone close to you? Parent, child, spouse, sibling? Yeah, depending on how lucky you are, anywhere between 3 and 5 days usually, which by the way is crazy, that we think that somebody should be back to work in 3 to 5 days after a significant loss. How long does the DSM give you, which is the book that tells you whether or not you're crazy? And I guarantee you're all in there. I'm like in there 5 or 7 times. How long does it give you before you get diagnosed with an adjustment disorder if you're not over it and on with it? How long do you get? It used to be 6 months. It's now a year, okay? And I think culturally we think that. We think, oh, a year, and you'll be good. A lot of people who've experienced really significant personal loss, they say the second year is actually worse. Because everybody thinks that first Christmas, that first birthday, that first Mother's Day, that first whatever, that's gonna be the hardest. And then you're gonna be okay. And you're not. Stephanie?
When my husband lost his sister, they talked daily, and it took him about 18 months to start acting like a normal human being again.
Mm-hmm. Which didn't mean he was over it.
He still was going to work, he still was doing the things he was supposed to do, but...
Kind of just going through the motions,
Yeah.
a zombie, yeah. That what people in grief work say is that to really reconstruct a new life, to be able to move forward with some sense of hope and purpose and optimism, it's about 3 to 5 years. So when you are looking at this journey, if we somehow think that, oh, you know, that first year or a month, or we set these artificial timetables, then we're setting ourselves and whoever is grieving up for failure. So just to kind of take that deep breath and go for it the long run. And knowing even after 3 to 5 years that someone can still go back in. I have a friend of mine who is 60, how old is she? She's 67. She looks like she's about 40. She's super, super spry. And her first husband was killed when she was 27, so 40 years ago. Does she miss him? Does she still grieve him? She has a great second husband. He's the greatest guy. Does that make her not miss her first husband? So just because someone gets to the place where they can start to move forward again, it doesn't mean they can never go back. It doesn't mean that this loss doesn't still significantly affect them in their life. And it becomes part of their life story. And it's you know, it's a part of a lot of our life story in this room. So that said, so I always feel a little weird doing this. So I introduce this, then we say it's not legitimate, and then we're gonna use it anyway. Because if I say to you, just expect this, then all I'm saying to you is expect chaos, which really is what I'm saying to you. But I do want to give you a little bit of a framework for the chaos, so that you have some sense of idea, some scaffolding to kind of work with. But I want you to allow the framework or the scaffolding to be very flexible, and not to think that this is how kids should act. There's no shitting here. I was talking to my niece the other day and I said, don't shit on yourself. And she said, what? And I said, don't shit on yourself. That when we start shitting on people or ourselves, we're usually wrong and we're usually harmful in those situations. So I'm still going to use this though, because it does give us a little bit of a framework. Now, when I first started working at the children's shelter, I was in my early 20s. I was finishing my bachelor's degree at the university, and I'd been in classes like this, so I talked about how traumatic it was for kids to lose their families. And I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. So then I started working at the children's shelter, and here we had 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old kids being brought into us, and my job was to take them in the back room, get them a hygiene kit, a package of socks, a package of underwear, which they'd always ask me, can I keep them? I'm like, yes, those are now your underpants. Nobody wants them back. And then I get them some clothes. And then I take them to their shelter home in an unknown part of town to complete strangers, and I just drop them off. And most of the kids were just like, okay, I can do this. And I remember talking to my boss about it, and I said, they're not upset. And she says, no, it's just another adventure for them. They're fine. By the way, my boss, love her, and she is crazy avoidant. Love her. Anyway, she said, yeah, it's just another adventure for them. They're fine. They'll be fine. So then, but what we didn't prepare our families for, and I look back now at this time and I think, oh my gosh, we didn't prepare our families at all for this. That what would happen is that night when the kid was supposed to brush their teeth, put on their pajamas and go to bed, the kid wouldn't. Or they'd be out in the front yard screaming and wouldn't come in the house. Or they'd run off down the street, which actually didn't happen very often, which kind of surprised me. Or like 2 little girls, they called 911 and said, a lady has us and she's not our mom. Which also I was surprised didn't happen more often. Or sometimes that would happen 2 days later, or a week later, or 2 weeks later. And we didn't prepare our families for it. And our families would call us and say, what do I do? And more often than not, we'd say, we'll come pick them up. They're too much trouble for you, we'll come pick them up. And we didn't prepare them for the fact that this kid might, and I've known honeymoon periods to last 2 seconds, and I've known them to last 2 weeks, that this kid might at first seem okay. Things may go really, really well. Just hold your breath, just wait. Because this is just that, like kind of what Stephanie was saying, this is sort of that zombie zone. This is like, it hasn't really hit me yet. And I'm kind of just going through the motions, and give them some time. And I'll tell you, when they start to move past this, that's a compliment to you guys, because it means they feel safe enough to start to feel what they need to feel. And it starts to hit them at that point. So don't be surprised. And like I said, some kids have absolutely no honeymoon period. They're gonna go for you right when they come in, which you're dealing with. Okay, so look at this list of potential expressions for anger and tell me, what do these kids get diagnosed as? And you may or may not be familiar with alphabet soup yet, but you will be. What do these kids get diagnosed as? ADHD, absolutely. What else? Anxiety disorder. What else? This is everyone's favorite, ODD, which I think is one of the stupidest diagnoses ever. Oppositional defiant disorder. What else? Conduct disorder. Possibly bipolar, emotional disorder, behavior disorder, I think I already said that. My favorite, intermittent rage explosive disorder, which means most of the time they're fine, but every once in a while they get really mad. And I think, don't we all have that? Because I'm pretty sure I do have that. Attachment disorder, they get diagnosed with, antisocial, they get diagnosed with everything. Here's what they don't get diagnosed with. They don't get diagnosed with, I miss my mom so bad I can barely breathe. And no one cares, and no one thinks I should miss her because she's a drug user and she's in jail. And so no one ever talks to me about her. They don't get diagnosed with that. They don't get diagnosed with a broken heart. The trauma we miss the most is grief, because we think these kids are relieved. And sometimes they are. And if they're relieved, what else are they? Guilty. And they have a lot of ambivalence about their removal sometimes. Now, is a 7-year-old kid going to come to you and say, I'm having a lot of ambivalence about my removal? No, he's going to kick the cat, okay? He doesn't have the language, first of all, or the trust to be able to have that conversation with you. Ambivalence is hard for us as adults to understand, how we can feel 2 ways, sometimes competing ways, about the same thing. And kids feel that, but they don't know what it is, and they don't know it's okay, and they don't know it's normal. And you can say that to them. You can say, you know what, sometimes kids, they miss their moms. And sometimes they think that maybe it's better here too. And then they feel guilty. And they think they don't miss their moms, but they do miss their moms. You can kind of have that conversation with them, kind of do a little mind reading sometimes. And that can be helpful for them when they simply can't articulate what they need to say. Now, they're going to compare the new home with the old home. Who's going to win? What if your home is bigger, nicer, cleaner, safer?
Old home has parents.
Yeah, it's their family. It's where they live. Now, I had a woman out in Tooele years ago. I probably shouldn't even tell you that much. A foster mom, somewhere in the state. And I was talking to her on the phone. Luckily, I was on the phone because I was laughing at her, so she couldn't see me. And they had a 9-year-old girl in their home, and she was crying, which is even worse than I'm laughing at her. And she's crying, and she's saying to me, this girl, she says her mom's house is bigger than our house. Our house is 4,000 square feet. I don't think her mom's house is bigger. And then the other day she said that her mom's boat is nicer than our boat. I don't think her mom has a boat. She was like, oh, like this for a while. So this is why I was laughing at her. Okay, now, why would that little girl do that? Erin?
I think she might be afraid that you'll diminish the memory of her mom.
Yeah.
Or not acknowledge the strengths that her mom has.
Yeah. She walks into this house that's bigger than she's been living in a hotel room with her mom. And she walks into this house that's bigger than any house she's ever been in, nicer than any house. They have boats, they have cars, they have ATVs. Is my mom okay? Is where I come from okay? And she needs to make it okay. Now, in communication theory, there's 2 levels of communication. One is the digital level, which is actually this level, the digital level, which is the precise meaning of what I say. Your mom's house is not bigger than 4,000 square feet. Your mom doesn't even have a house. But then there's the analog level, which is where the meaning lies. It's less precise, but it's actually more true. Is my mom okay? Is where I come from okay? We get caught up in this level, the factual truth about what they're saying, and we miss what they're actually trying to communicate. So don't get caught too much up in the black and white, absolute factual stuff when kids talk. Try to listen to what they're really trying to communicate with us. I was talking about this one night in class, and I had a guy in class, and he raised his hand. He says, yeah, well, my daughter is a liar. And I said, okay. And he went on to talk about they had adopted their daughter from India. I think she was about 11 when they adopted her. And he said she met Mother Teresa. Well, she was in an orphanage here, and Mother Teresa was in an orphanage in this part of India. Do you know how big India is? Like, yeah, I do. Well, I don't really, but I've seen the map. But I also know that part of, the legacy of British colonialism is they have a pretty good railroad system. So it's possible that Mother Teresa could have gone from one part of India to the other, and who the hell cares? If this little girl has to tell herself a story about where she comes from being okay because she met Mother Teresa, whether or not she actually did, I don't care. I need to say to her, tell me about where you came from. I need to say to this other girl, tell me about your mom. It sounds like you miss your mom. What do you miss the most about her? What do you remember about her? I wish I knew her better. Brad?
Oh, I was just going to say sometimes kids they don't want you to think that they came from nothing either, so they make comparisons because, even if they did come from nothing.
Yeah, they need to defend where they came from. They need to know it's okay. And especially, and they may think you're judging because you have nice stuff or big house or whatever, or bigger than they've had, that they may think that I need to prove to you that where I come from is okay. And to let them know that, you know what, I understand. I'm okay with that. I'm okay where you come from. And in time, and it may be, and everybody's different, but with therapy and with help and stuff, they start to accept their own story and where they come from, and it's okay. It's like I'm quoting Brene Brown tonight, but what she talks about, we either own our story and live inside of it with worthiness, or we live outside of our own story and hustle for worthiness. That we start to help them to be able to own their own story, and that the story is a story, and that's just, it is what it is. And then we help them to understand it in a way that gives them compassion and grace. So when you see anger, another thing to remember too is that, like that little girl with the dress, did she consciously think, foster mom's giving me a dress? I feel triggered. I'm going to blow up. Is that what she did? No. This was pure reaction, pure emotion. And This isn't a conscious effort. And so many times we feel like our kids are trying to make our lives miserable. They lay awake at night thinking of things they could do to us. They're not that sophisticated. You know, they're kids. And just like most of us don't do things to upset people in our lives, but we still do upset people in our lives, our kids are the same way. That they're just responding, oftentimes they're reacting. And when we see anger, it's oftentimes about a situation that overwhelms their current capacity to cope with that situation. And trauma triggers are always going to be one of those things. Other things can come into play too. That when we think about trauma triggers, we're not always going to know them. Because like I said, you don't all get the origin story with these kids. You guys are figuring it out, and you guys will know more about it because you're going to live with them. But when something like that happens, think about, you know, what was going on, what was the time of day, what was the time of year even, what was, you know, just try to start to think about it. Because when a trauma occurs, the brain records as many things about that trauma as it can. And you may not always be able to ferret out everything, but start thinking about that, because it may start to give you a clue as to when and why. And that's going to help them. Because if you can say to them, you know what I've noticed? When you're hungry, when it's after 3 o'clock and you haven't eaten since lunchtime, you get kind of cranky, like mean cranky. So that, telling them that for the rest of their life could benefit them, because they're going to eat every day at 3 o'clock so that they're less triggered by that feeling of hunger that's most likely to hit them at that point. Now, there are things that tend to be hot spots for all of our kids that show up again and again and again. One, we talked about food. Why is food such a trigger for so many of our kids? Most of them haven't had enough. Either they haven't had enough consistently, or they've had enough and then periods of severe deprivation. And the brain will never forget not having enough food, because it's about survival. So food is a big thing. And then also all the cultural stuff around food and what they like and what they don't like, and textures and all that kind of stuff. Tomorrow night we're having at the Salt Lake, the Foothill Anderson Library, the Salt Lake clusters, we're having an occupational therapist come. And we usually do this at least once a year, and they do a training on food, because a lot of times it's sensory stuff with kids around food. And so if we're forcing them to eat something that is revolting to them, that can be a real trigger too. So thinking about food and thinking about our own hang-ups about food too. Like if we grew up in a family where you eat everything on your plate, or you're being disrespectful and wasteful, and we've carried that on, that can actually trigger kids. So we need to think about our own issues around food too, and think about how we can help kids with those things. Why is bedtime a trigger for almost all of our kids? It's actually a trigger for most kids. Say that again?
They didn't always have a certain schedule.
So now we're starting to put them to bed at 8 o'clock at night, and they're like, I used to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning watching TV. Why do you want me to go to bed at 8 o'clock? So different schedules, and maybe they didn't really have a bedtime before. Why else do you think bedtime? Aaron, and then?
You're really vulnerable when you're asleep.
Yeah, I heard an evolutionary biologist say one time, there's no time we're more likely to be eaten than when we're sleeping. And they were just trying to demonstrate how vulnerable we are, and that we've obviously held on to it for a very important reason. It must be really important to us because we're so vulnerable. And for our kids, domestic violence, sexual abuse, drug transactions, arrest, nighttime can be an incredibly dangerous time. And at that time to say, I'm going to put myself in the most vulnerable position I can be in, is really hard for a lot of our kids.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It could be that that's when stuff happened.
Yeah.
That's when the trauma occurred consistently was at night.
Yeah, it was at nighttime. We had a girl, a 15-year-old girl who was adopted, and she wouldn't sleep at night. She'd stay up all night long. And then she would go to school, and she'd come home, and they had a great room, so the couch was right by the kitchen, and the girl would come home right after school, and she would lay on the couch, and she'd sleep until 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and then she'd get up and she wouldn't sleep all night. And it was driving the adoptive parents crazy. They're like, what is wrong with her? And they didn't know this, they finally found out that she'd been sexually abused, and that going to sleep at night was incredibly triggering for her. And they had to do some real work with her to get her to that place, and it took literally years for her to feel like she felt safe enough to go to bed at night. So things like, night lights can be really helpful, routines are really helpful, calming routines. That's why we give our kids baths, not just because they're stinky, but because it also is calming for them. For those of you who use scented things that are helpful, if your child likes that those kind of things can be helpful for them. Locks on doors for a lot of our kids. Just, the kind you can open, but still a lock on their door for some kids, or some kids want their doors open at night. So ask the kids, what's going to help you to feel most safe at night so you can relax and get good sleep? Because if they're not getting good sleep, nothing else is going well for them. And then if you really are concerned about their sleeping, don't hesitate to talk to a doctor about it, because if they're not sleeping, nothing is going to go right in their life. So they've got to be sleeping. And then Janet talked about physical boundaries. Those hugs, the touch on the arm. Some kids, if you stand too close behind them, they will come back at you like that. That's how I feel in Costco. So think about those things and pay attention to how kids trigger. And say to them, I've noticed that when someone stands too close behind you, you get kind of agitated and kind of really upset about that. And we don't always have to know what it's about. Just knowing it's a trigger sometimes is okay. We don't necessarily have to know all the history behind it. Just know that that's what it does. And then, they can work on the other stuff later. Now, this is a quote from a book called Brain-Based Parenting, and it's by a guy by the name of Daniel Hughes, who I don't love, partly because he used to be on the dark side of the attachment world. He's since repented and come to the light, but I still have not forgiven him, because he's not totally disavowed some of the stuff he used to write about. But I do like this quote, and I have left it in here, because this is once again the idea of the origin story, is this behavior helped keep this kid alive. It helped them keep them safe. It helped them do something, help them cope. I want to honor that behavior. I want to respect that behavior because it helped my kid, and teach them new ways of being in the world as they start to believe the world is different. But I need to know that behavior isn't crazy. That behavior actually probably was pretty smart at some point. Now, in a situation where a kid is really triggered and you're having, maybe there's a meltdown or, a big incident, the most important thing is that they're safe. And I'll tell you a story about that in a second. Document as soon as possible, because we forget things. Document factually. How many of you guys have ever been taught to document? Like in a job or something? Okay, so it's just the facts, ma'am. It's no conclusions, it's no opinions. If I say the kid threw the chair at me, I don't know he threw the chair at me. He might have just thrown it in my direction. I don't know he was angry. I'm not going to make any conclusions about anything. I'm simply going to say he picked up the chair and threw it in my direction. No conclusions, no opinions. And anything you write, remember, it could be read aloud in court. It's discoverable. It goes in the child's file. So any communication you have with the caseworker, with the guardian ad litem, with the resource family consultant, that is not privileged. It's always going to be in the child's file. That file is discoverable by the defense attorney for the parents. And so anything that you write is going to come out. So always be thinking about that when you're writing it. Think about this is being read aloud by a judge in court, in front of me, in front of the birth parents, in front of the kid, so that you keep that in mind. That's how it used to help me. It's helped me to think, what if the kid reads this? That's when I used to have to document. What if the kid reads this? And then make sure the caseworker and any other parties know as soon as possible. So I'm going to tell you a story about establishing safety. So Les Harris, who is a trainer out in Vernal, who's just a great guy, great trainer, if anybody needs to make it class number 3, Les is doing class number 3 at 10 o'clock Wednesday morning in this room. So if you need to make it class number 3, Les will be here, and he's great. Anyway, so he told this story. He used to work at a lockdown juvenile facility. So it was kind of like detention. So kids, it was lockdown. They had to, they couldn't get away. But they did get away. One day, 3 kids got away from the staff and got out and ran out from the staff. And the way the building was built, the parking lot was under the building. So there was a driveway that went down under the building, and there was a retaining wall on one side that I think at its tallest was about 15 feet tall. And so the kids were standing on the edge of the retaining wall, going like this to the staff. And anytime the staff got closer to them, they kind of edged closer to it and kept going like this. And it was, it was concrete. It was a sheer drop, and it was concrete at the bottom. And so it would be really awful if they had actually fallen or jumped. So the staff were back there yelling at the kids, "Get off of there! And you're on restriction! And you're in so much trouble!" And I think they'd called the police. The police weren't there yet, and it was just like this big thing. So all the staff are yelling at these kids, and the kids are like, "Ah!" So Les gets there, and he sees what's happening. And if you ever meet Les, this will make total sense to you. So Les goes down, down, and looks up at the kids. He says, okay, I'm going to 7-Eleven. What do you want? Okay, what do you want? Okay, what do you want? Okay, got it. I'll be back in about 7 minutes. You better be down from the wall. Les goes to 7-Eleven, comes back. Kids are on the lawn waiting for their treats. Les gives them the treats. And the other staff start yelling at Les, saying, you just rewarded them for that, and you're terrible. And this is, what did Les say? They're off the wall. Okay. In that moment, the most important thing was getting those kids off the wall. And those kids will have consequences to deal with, absolutely. But get them off the wall. So, whatever you have to do to get kids safe in that moment, you get kids safe. So here we may see things, kids do things like take back what they said. Oh, I just was lying. I just made that up. Or they may say things like, if I make my bed every day, can I go home? If I don't fight with my brother, can I go home? If I do well on my next spelling test, can I go home? And you say, no. This is a good time to remind them that they're not in foster care because of anything they've done wrong. So say, you know what? I hope you don't fight with your brother because you guys could be really good friends. I hope you learn how to spell hippopotamus. I hope you make your bed because research shows you sleep better in a made bed than an unmade bed. Although research also shows if you make your bed, you have more dust mites. Have you guys seen that research? Well, I have a lot of ambivalence now about making the bed. I'm like, should I make it? Should I not make it? Because some research says it's better. Some research says... Anyway, so you tell them why those things that they want to do are going to be good for them anyway. But then you say to them, but you know what, honey, you're not in foster care because you didn't make your bed. You're not in foster care because you fought with your brother. And I think it's unconscionable for kids not to know, maybe not every gory detail, but it's their life. They need to know as much as they can about their own life. And so to say to them, hopefully they know, your mom has trouble with using heroin or whatever it is, and she's getting help right now, and we're rooting hard for her. That's why you're in foster care, not because of anything you've done wrong. And it's a good time to remind them that they're not responsible for being in foster care. Now, I forgot to ask this. I usually ask this with anger. Is anger okay in your home? Is it okay for kids to be angry? Yeah, so I see lots of yeses, which is good. I've been asking this question for 17 years, and I see a lot more yeses today than I used to see a long time ago. And I'm glad for that, because I think that anger would come a long way with accepting, actually all emotions, but definitely anger. My dad growing up, when I was growing up, my dad used to always say to me, don't be mad, you shouldn't get mad, it's not good to get mad. Now, did that keep me from getting mad? No. All it did was leave me alone with my anger. And I thought, well, something must be wrong with me because I get mad a lot. I blame it on the Apache and Irish blood. I have a temper and I get mad. And my dad was telling me as a kid there was something wrong with me because I got angry. So when your kids get angry, it's so vital to say to them, you know what, honey, it's okay to get mad. It's normal to get mad. Everybody gets mad. Now, what's the next part of that sentence?
But this is behavior.
Yeah, it's not okay, whatever happened, to hit someone, to break your finger by hitting the wall, to break a toy, whatever it is that they did. That's not okay. Now, if you give a kid a not okay list, what else do you have to give them? Yeah, because think about anger. How many of you guys, when you get angry, just sit in your chair and go? No, what do you do? What do you do when you get mad?
I cry because I'm really mad.
You cry. Okay, just an emotional response. You cry. Okay, what else do you do? Do you have any cleaners in the room? Like when you, yeah, that's what, my house is really clean. I've been really ticked off. Yeah, you clean. Anybody exercise? Go out and run. Go for a walk the dog. Music for a lot of people. Yeah, most people do something, write mean emails to people. Maybe you never send them, but you write them. Most of us do something. In fact, evolutionary biologists think that one of the reasons we've held on to anger through all these, millions of years of evolution is because it compels us to act, often stupidly, but it does compel us to act. So if you give a kid a not okay list, you better give them an okay list, because that anger, that energy of anger has to go somewhere. And if you don't, if you only give them the not okay, they don't know what to do with it. So you got to give them the okay list. Now, sadness. Is sadness okay? Yes. Do we have any chronic cheer-uppers in the room? That when your kids are, Andre's pointing at Brianna, that when your kids are upset, you just do everything you can, including stand on your head to get them to smile and laugh? Do we have anybody in the room does that? Okay. That was also my dad, by the way. A lot of parents believe that if their kids are sad or angry, it's not good, and we do what we can to help them stop feeling that way. When in reality, sadness, like anger, is normal and part of the human experience. How many of you guys have seen the movie Inside Out? Absolutely required viewing. And this really talks about this, that parents who put a lot of stress on their kids to be happy all the time, it's a lot of stress for kids because kids aren't happy all the time. And so I want to say to this kid, you know what, honey? It's okay you're sad. It's normal to be sad. This is something that anybody would be sad about. It's okay. And give them that permission and that space to be sad. And you can talk to them about, maybe they don't know what to do. You can give them some ideas. You know, when I'm sad, I cry. Sometimes I write letters to people I miss. You know, I might, you know, just listen to sad music or watch a sad movie. I do things that help me feel the sadness without being overwhelmed by the sadness, and kind of talk about those things. Now, some of you, and I've talked to families like this, who have kids who trade on sadness. So I have a kid in my old neighborhood that was like this. So there'd be a bunch of kids playing, and she'd be over here in the corner like this. And so I'd go over to her and I'd say, "What's wrong?" And she'd say, "Oh, my bunny died." "Oh, I'm so sorry your bunny died. When did your bunny die?" "When I was 3. She's 9. Okay, now I'm not saying she can't still be sad about the bunny. You know, she could be. I'm still sad about, you know, one of my dogs, well, both of my dogs who've died in the last, 15 years, but I'm not saying she can't be sad, you know. And then she'd say, "And my grandma died too." "Oh, did your grandma die?" "When I was a baby." And but this is just kid. This is just this kid. This is something that I've known her for a long time, and this is what this kid does. So if you have a kid like this, and a lot of parents then worry, you know, if I give in to her sadness, and she's just going to be sad all the time. The reality is actually, this is maybe a kid who hasn't been heard for some reason. I don't really know what goes on. I know her family pretty well, and I don't really know where this comes from. But sometimes people do that because they've never actually been heard, and so they never get past it because it's never been acknowledged for them. And sometimes it's just how they interact with the world. I don't really know. So if you have a kid like that, you can set a timer for 10, 15 minutes, whatever you can stand. And you say to them, "Okay, we're going to be super sad. We're going to think about sad things that have happened to us, maybe sad things that have happened to the people, sad things we think about. We're going to be sad. We might even cry, and that's okay, because sad is part of life. And then when the timer goes off, we're going to think of something we can do to help us feel a little bit better. Because there's always going to be sad things in life, and we have to learn how to feel the sadness, and also sometimes to make ourselves feel better." And then usually mine involves a trip to Iceberg, but talk to them about how they can alleviate some of those things. Now, one thing to be really aware of is that the original term that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross used was depression, which she didn't mean a clinical state. She meant a overwhelming sadness. There is some debate in the clinical community about whether or not this should be treated as depression. And when I say treated, I mean literally treated, including with medication. And there are people who say, don't pathologize grief. It's normal. The sadness is normal, and we don't want to pathologize that. And then there are people who say, okay, I get that, and yet this can trigger a true clinical episode of depression, and it can even trigger suicidal ideation and suicidal behaviors. So if you have a kid who you feel has gone from expected sadness to potential true depression, self-harm statements, self-harm attempts, talking about suicide, if they've had a friend or a family member who've committed suicide recently or in the past, if they seem to have been really upset and all of a sudden they seem okay, a kid who's really careful and all of a sudden isn't careful anymore, these are all potential signs. And we usually do at least one training every year on suicide prevention. We usually bring in the Hope Squad to do a training on suicide prevention. But don't ever hesitate to call. And there's a 24-hour number, and I mean to put it in here. I'll try to remember to get it for you guys on Wednesday if you guys don't already have it. There's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week line to call that you can call, the kids can call, and I would recommend calling that number if you have any concerns at all. Don't say, oh, I'm overreacting, or they'd never hurt themselves, or, don't ever let that question lie. Go ahead and make that phone call and let somebody professional make the call about whether or not it's something that needs to be looked at. What's the youngest child in Utah whose death has ever been classified as a suicide? Anybody know? 7. So we think about suicide usually as an adolescent issue, when in reality it can be much younger. We had a presenter in our all-staff meeting a couple months ago, and he told a story about a fourth grade little girl and her suicide. And it was just, it's devastating at any age and incredibly devastating. So don't think this is just about adolescents. This can be younger kids too. All right, so most people move toward healing, given permission to grieve, space to grieve, compassion and grace. We have a natural push toward healing. So I'm going to tell you my all-time favorite story that I tell in pre-service, then I'll give you a homework assignment and send you home. So this story, I think, illustrates this point really beautifully. This little girl, 4 years old, in foster care, one of our foster moms told me this story a few years ago, that after every bath, the little girl would say to the foster mom, get a really big towel. And so the foster mom would get a big towel. The little girl would say, okay, now wrap me up in it like a baby. So the foster mom would wrap her up she said really tight like a baby, so she'd wrap her up and swaddle her up in this towel. And the little girl would say, okay, now pick me up and put me on your bed. And so the foster mom would pick her up and put her on the bed. And the little girl would lay there and she'd say, okay, now pretend like there's a whole bunch of other babies all around me. Which baby do you want? And then she'd look at her. And the foster mom would, of course, look at all of the babies, all of whom are beautiful and worthy of love and belonging. And, of course, she would always choose this little girl. And every time she had a different reason for choosing her. And I love this story because this little girl at 4 years of age came up with her own ritual of being chosen, of being unique, of being wanted. No therapist said to her, tell you what, why don't you try this and see if it works? She just came up with it. So this is, I think, one of the things, when we talk about our kids, even the word traumatized, I think, can be problematic. Damaged, broken, traumatized, abused, neglected, maltreated, any of those words, it implies that somehow this kid isn't going to be able to be okay, and that we're their rescuers. When in fact, what I really believe is that these kids have innate within them the capacity to heal, and that our job is to provide the environment for them to heal in, and trust them. That so many times, if we think of my kid as damaged, I'm not going to trust him. If I think of him as broken or disordered, I'm not going to trust him. And I'm not going to let them lead where they need to go. And even some of the behaviors that drive me crazy might be behaviors that help them, and might even help them to some degree now if I can understand them and guide them the best that I can. So trust the innate healing capacity of people and of children, and trust that it's there. And so many times we just stand back and watch them. We're not the rescuers, we're not the saviors. They have innate within them what they need to heal. We just provide the environment. Okay, so last thing, your homework. So on page, this is going to be in section 4, and on page 71. This is going to continue with the idea of the origin story. You're going to read Eddie's case, which is going to be pages 71 and 72. And at the end of Eddie's scenario on page 72, there's going to be questions for discussion. We never do it in large group because at this point you guys are emotionally spent. And so I just send it home with you as homework. So you can just write your answers on another piece of paper. I will try really hard to, in fact, I know I will put new goodies in there because another trainer brought me a bunch of goodies today. So I'll put some new goodies in the homework basket. And so Wednesday, go ahead and put your homework in the homework basket.
What are the pages again?
Oh, 71. And so 71 to 72 is the actual story. And then the questions are at the end of the story on page 72. So just answer those. And this is once again reinforcing the idea of the origin story. And those of you who are done tonight, you're okay. Don't stress about it. I'm not going to come after you and get your homework from you. But anybody who's coming Wednesday, go ahead and put it in the basket, and we'll count that as done. And then Wednesday, so tonight's a little bit of a shorter night, and then Wednesday is also, we're usually done between 8 and 8:30 on Wednesday night too. So I will see you guys Wednesday night. And it gets a lot lighter after this, I promise. I promise. So I'll see you guys.